Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, February 3rd, 2020 Board of Commissioners meeting. At this time, I'll call the meeting into order, and we'll have the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Beaumont will lead us in our invocation this evening.
Heavenly Father, I thank you for this glorious evening. Father, another wonderful day in the county of Currituck. Lord, I ask that you would bless each and every one of us in this room this evening. Father, that you would give wisdom and counsel to this Board of Commissioners. Father, that we would first and foremost honor you, but Father, that we would go about the business of taking care of the residents of Currituck County. We ask your blessing this evening in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Beaumont. All right. Do we have any changes to the agenda this evening? Anyone? Thank you. I'll accept the motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next up on the agenda is public comment. I do not have anyone signed up this evening for public comment. Is there anyone in the room that would like to speak to public comment this evening? All right. Seeing none, I will close public comment. Good, Mr. Etheridge?
You're trying to take my paper.
Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda this evening is Commissioner's Report. I'll start with you tonight, Mr. McCord.
I don't really have anything to report as of this evening. I'll tell you one thing I would like to say. Today while I was on patrol at the Sheriff's Department, I went to Griggs School, which I rarely am on that end of the county in the morning time, but I thought it was really cool. The first grade class, we were in Cindy Bell's classroom, and the announcements came on. They had the little monitors where the kids did the Pledge of Allegiance, and a couple of little kids, he was like snudging another kid. He was like, "Get up, it's the Pledge of Allegiance." And it was pretty cool to see, a 6 and 7 year old child, participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. And it makes you proud, to be here, that they're being still taught that in our schools. So kudos to the schools.
All right.
That's it.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Etheridge.
I just read earlier that today is Dare County's 150th birthday. So I'd like to wish Dare County happy birthday, but tell them they'll never pass Currituck.
All right.
Did they thank us for turning it over to them?
If it wasn't for Currituck, they wouldn't be in existence.
All right. There you go. Ms. Jarvis.
Thank you. In 1862, the Federal Morrill Act provided funds for the sale of public lands to establish colleges for teaching agriculture and mechanical arts. In North Carolina, these funds went on to establish what is today known as NC State University, founded in 1887. A second Morrill Act was passed in 1890, and that led to the creation of North Carolina A&T State University. From the start, both NC State and NC A&T realized the importance of extension work in bringing research-based knowledge to improve the lives of farmers, families, and communities. In 1914, the North Carolina Agricultural Extension Service was formally formed. Today, the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service is leading the way to better communities like ours through its endeavors in youth development, agricultural production, and family and consumer sciences, just to name a few. On Saturday, January 25th, I had the pleasure of attending a fruit pruning tree class of about 15 other citizens. And to say that I learned a lot was an understatement. I would like to thank Chris Blaha, Julie Lockhart, and Ozzie Core for conducting this class and giving their time, commitment, and expertise to make it so successful. I encourage all of our citizens to go to the Cooperative Extensions page on the county's website or on your favorite social media platform and see for yourself the many classes and the many opportunities that this wonderful group offers to better our county. On a second note, I will not be here for our next Board of Education meeting. As many of you know, my husband was sick in the fall, and we canceled many of our family vacations, and so we are going to finally get to take our family vacation. So I will not be here for the February 17th board meeting.
Okay, that was Board of Education or Board of
Oh,
Commissioners?
sorry, Board of Commissioners. I wrote it down here wrong. The Board of Commissioners
Thank
meeting
you.
on the 17th.
I'm sure they'll be sad that you'll miss their meeting as well.
They'll be depressed. Thank you.
Mr. Payment.
The only thing I want to report to you tonight, again, and I do this every time, is just keep your volunteer firefighters in your thoughts and prayers with the activity. And if you can help them by volunteering, supporting them anyway, I know they would appreciate that. And secondly, just want to remind everybody, I'm not sure if the county manager will bring this up, but Friday and Saturday, this Board of Commissioners will be having their annual retreat. It'll be here at the courthouse. And we're going to be discussing all sorts of topics throughout the county, ideas, thoughts, and some agenda items to discuss. So, and it's open to the public. If you'd like to come, I think Friday it starts at 12, and then Saturday it's going to start at 9. Be more than welcome to come here and listen and hear what we're talking about. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Etheridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last month, I had the pleasure of meeting the College of the Albemarle's new president, Dr. Bagwell, while he toured our county. And last week, I had the pleasure of seeing him again, along with several trustees of the college, who attended the groundbreaking ceremony of our new public safety building. What pride in Currituck as a citizen as well as the county commissioner to see the building of this facility finally begin. Not only will the building house our public safety employees, but it will also provide services, programs, and training for the area. I know that as a board looking forward, we continue to look forward to our relationship with the College of the Albemarle under Mr. Bagwell's leadership. And as the former director of elections, I can't let this slip by. Primary election day is Tuesday, March the 3rd, and the last day you can register to vote is this coming Friday. Also, if you've moved within the county, if you've gotten married or just changed your name, or if you wish to change your party affiliation, you must get it done by Friday so you won't have a whole lot of trouble when you go to vote on election day. This is a party primary, so that means you must vote in the party that you're registered with. If you're registered unaffiliated, you can ask for a Republican ballot, or a Democrat or a Green Party. I think there's 5 or 6 ballot styles. If you wish to vote early, one-stop voting starts on Thursday, February the 14th, and hours and information about voting and any other information can be found on the county's website under the election board, or you can call their office at 232-2525. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's actually the 13th, Thursday the 13th.
13th.
Yeah.
I didn't see.
I usually have 14th, I think.
Oh, I was thinking about
That's the Board of Education meeting.
Valentine's Day is Friday.
There you go. We all do it.
All right, Commissioner Bromont, you're up.
I, too, is at the groundbreaking for the public safety building, and that is the culmination of many, many years of coordination between county staff and the needs of the county, and that is going to be that's going to be the start of something special that's going to be going on at the county complex. So that's the linchpin, the public safety building. There are other buildings coming out associated with that, and we anxiously look forward to becoming basically a center of excellence when it comes to public safety training. One other thing, at our last meeting, we had a presentation by Mark Stefanik, the school superintendent, and one of the things that he brought out was that because Currituck County experienced such an increase in the number of kids in schools, there's a certain funding metric that is based on our ADM, and which is the number of kids that are in the school, and it's predicated on you're actually eligible for additional funds if you reach a certain threshold. Evidently, we missed the threshold by 2/3 of a student by less than a full business day, costing the Currituck County approximately $564,000. So I met with both Bob Steinberg and Bobby Hanig, our representative and senator, explained to them what went on. They both got an email yesterday about that. I would encourage everyone that is here, everyone that's watching, please pick up your phone and call them and say, Currituck County needs our funds. And if there's any way that it could happen, whatever we need to do to try and encourage them to gain support within the legislature, $564,000 is a significant amount. That's all.
Thank you. All right, and you guys pretty much covered what I was going to talk about this evening. So I too attended the groundbreaking in the public safety building, and it's y'all covered it all. So I won't beat that one to death. Thank you all. Next agenda item this evening is the county manager's report. Mr. Steichleather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things to reiterate what Vice Chairman Payment had to say. We do have our retreat coming up this Friday and Saturday here, beginning at 12 o'clock on Friday and at 9 o'clock on Saturday. The public's welcome to attend. Like I said, we've got a wide range of topics that we're going to go over, and this is basically a retreat to set up budget priorities for the next year. So it's more to get you all in tune with where the budget's heading. Department budgets are due to me on February 14th. So, and then from there we'll start to build the budget. So we are a couple weeks away from hitting really the meat of budget season. It gets really hectic around here at that time. Two other things: we've had two pretty large bids that came in. We had the ABC store come in and Shingle Landing Park. Both of those bid openings were last week. I'm happy to say that both of those bids came in under budget. So that definitely sets those projects up for success, I think. Well, you will see those probably come to the Board of Commissioners meeting at the next one for the award to bid. But so the kind of time frame on those, both of those could begin construction as early as probably end of March, 1st of April. The park can go a little bit quicker than the ABC store just because of what it is. But we're really excited about both of those projects. And when you put that in with the public safety building as well as a whole host of smaller capital projects, you all really have a top-notch staff behind you managing these projects, managing these bid processes, going through the entitlement processes for all this. It takes dozens of people behind the scenes to make any of these projects even get to this point, let alone actually construct. And so I just wanted to congratulate them on everything that they've done and give my heartfelt appreciation to the staff that's worked on those things. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next agenda item is public hearings. Item A, PB 19-28, Curtis Bay Medical Waste, a text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 4, Use Standards, and Chapter 10, definitions and measurement to allow warehousing and distribution of medical waste with a use permit in a heavy industrial zoning. For that, I will turn it over to Ms. Cicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The text amendment that you have before you tonight, it has come out of it began as an enforcement issue at 913 Currituck Highway, the Sparrow Mine. We received a complaint that there was some medical waste being stored on this property, and there were other accusations that came out of this enforcement. Our code enforcement went out there and found that, yes, there was some medical waste that was being stored out there, and essentially this property was being used as a medical waste transfer facility. So they would bring medical waste there, leave it in the back of a truck until they had amassed enough medical waste to then move it along to their processing plant. Curtis Bay was the company that was there doing this medical waste transfer. You see the Sproul Mine, and this is an aerial shot of the property that this will immediately impact, but this is a text amendment, so then it would be not only for Sproul Mine and 913 Currituck Highway, but it would be valid throughout the county. So a possible remedy for an enforcement issue, for a code enforcement issue, is a text amendment. Our current UDO does not address medical waste. We don't define that. We don't address medical waste transfer stations. And also our current UDO does not allow any type of bulk waste, commercial waste, garbage, or construction of demolition waste to be placed on a site, on an extractive site. So if you have a mine, an extractive industry, that you cannot basically, you can't turn your mine into a place where bulk waste, any type of waste is amassed. So the text amendment tonight before you, it defines medical waste. It would also allow a warehouse distribution of medical waste in the heavy industrial, in the heavy industrial, so we would amend the use table. What is being proposed is to allow this use with a use permit, so then the applicant would then have to come back before you for that use permit approval process, but we had to amend the ordinance before that could happen. And it would also allow medical waste transfer to coincide with an extractive use. Their proposal with this text amendment was that there would be no processing of waste would occur on the site, and the waste would not stay on site for more than 5 days. So this is what the applicant is proposing as far as the amendment to the UDO.
Can I interrupt your train of thought there? So
Yes.
they're suggesting that this become an allowed use on the site with the mine.
Yes.
Okay.
They are proposing to amend the language that would not allow any type of waste on mining, or what we call, the UDO defines it as an extractive use.
Okay.
So a sand mine, the sand mine, Sproul sand mine. So they, in that language, it's actually, for an extractive industry, it's number 8, refuse. This is section 4.1.5, industrial uses. What the applicant is suggesting is under 8, refuse, where it says no bulk waste, hazardous waste, commercial waste, garbage, construction, or demolition waste shall be placed on the site. Once again, the site of the mine, the extractive industry. They are suggesting, notwithstanding the foregoing, warehousing and distribution of medical waste for processing or disposal of site, disposal off-site may be authorized by use permits so long as any medical waste brought on the site does not remain on the site for more than 5 days. So they are suggesting their text amendment to define medical waste, to allow medical waste transfer station in heavy industrial with the use permit, and to allow the medical waste transfer to be allowed on on a mine site. The staff recommends additional conditions to the applicant's proposed language, and those were listed in the staff report, but let me go over those. And this would be an amendment to section 4.2, use-specific standards, and that the medical waste shall not be held on site for more than 5 days. When medical waste warehousing and distribution occurs on the same parcel as a state-permitted mining operation, the warehousing and distribution activities shall not take place within the area permitted for use as a mine. There shall be no outdoor storage of medical waste. All waste shall be kept inside approved containers, trailers, or structures. All required federal, state, and local permits are maintained. A Type C buffer yard is required when necessary to screen the use from off-site views, and processing or disposal of medical waste shall not occur on site. So staff is recommending these additional conditions to be placed in the ordinance so that when this applicant or any applicant comes before you for a use permit, you will have these standards set in your ordinance. It's also worth noting that in 2009, a special use permit was granted for a parcel in Windchaser, that industrial park, to do a very similar use, having medical waste come in, fill up a transfer truck. Once the transfer trucks get to a certain point, they take that and go off to a processing facility called Stericycle. So it is worth noting that a similar use already exists in the county. Staff and Planning Board recommendation, we recommend approval of this text amendment subject to the additional use-specific standards that I just went over with you all that was listed in your staff report. And at this point, that's the presentation for this text amendment. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
So the existing permitted site, it's just in a regular, on a lot, in a regular HI district, is that correct?
Yes, it is existing in Windchaser Industrial Park, and it is, does have a use permit, special use permit, and they are zoned HI.
Where are they located at now?
Sproul Mine, the current
Okay.
Curtis Bay is located in Sproul Mine at 913 Currituck Highway. So, let me get back to,
Is the applicant here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Laura,
so,
is the
yeah.
applicant here?
yes, they're here. They are here. The transfer station area takes place in this part of the property, and you can see the mine activity is located more to the northern part of the property.
You also said that it was brought to your attention because of a complaint.
Yes.
The Sproul Mine, if my memory serves me correctly, there's been several violations on the Sproul Mine, correct?
Yes. Currently, the Sproul Mine is in violation of their use permit because there was an over-excavation. They were, I think at 30, our UDO sets a standard of 30% of the total property. They got up to, I believe, 36 or 37% excavated area. And they have been working towards remediation. We've been working with Mr. Sproul and his surveyor to try to adjust that. However, when we found this issue out, they had two violations, one against the over-excavation of the mine that we've been trying to work with him, and then with this accessory use or additional use that's going on the property. So to resolve one of those issues, either Curtis Bay needed to cease using the property or come forward for a text amendment.
Also, you keep saying it's Currituck Highway. The new false track that was approved, how close is this to that? Isn't it kind of across the road?
Yeah, here's Survey Road, and Survey Road would come down a little bit further, and yeah, probably about 3/4 of a mile to a mile.
A mile north of it.
Thank you.
Ms. LaCicero, just two questions. I guess you brought up the Sproul Mine with the, and if I'm not mistaken, last time those violations were brought up, Commissioner Beaumont might remember too, weren't we supposed to get periodic site updates from that, or you know, of how that refill and all that was going on to correct that violation?
We were supposed to get.
Are we?
I did speak with Mr. Sproul's surveyor, and probably about 2 months ago, and the last we had was, I think he was getting close to about 33% over excavation. He reduced it down to about 33%. They needed to resolve this issue as far as Curtis Bay, so that then they could in turn close their state mining permit, and then come back and ask you all for a change in their use permit for the mine. But we have these two issues, two violations, and we can't resolve one without, we have to resolve.
So is staff going out there periodically, as a couple years ago was mentioned, and just checked on it, or?
Well, they're supposed to be, my staff is really good, but they're not surveyors. So
Okay.
they can't go in and see how much sand is being put back in.
Okay.
And so I've had open conversations with Mr. Sproul's surveyor about the point where he is with the over-excavation. So we don't have any formal submitted report, but I do, like I said, I had during this process with Curtis Bay, trying to figure out find a solution for that violation and a solution for Mr. Sproul's over excavation. I have been in touch with his surveyor that says Mr. Sproul is making progress on the over excavation.
Okay, and then one last question. Back in 2009, on the Board of Adjustments ruling for that use permit, There's one stipulation in there that says, please clarify any odors that could be generated from that. I mean, do they generate odors, or was there a concern, or no?
I visited the site.
Okay.
Okay, and if everyone's familiar with a Sharps container, you know what I'm talking about? Everything is in a sealed plastic
Okay.
bin. There is nothing's exposed.
Okay.
It's literally a secure plastic tote to a secure plastic tote to a truck. And it's, no.
You don't smell them in a
No,
doctor's office.
it's impossible.
Can I ask a question about the Stericycle? Do they have to meet the same, are the same conditions there about not holding the waste for 5 days and no outdoor storage? Do we have the same requirements? I know it was, you said in 2009.
They would be held to the standards that were in the ordinance at 2009, or the standards for their use permit that was issued in 2009, so though they would not be required to have the no more than 5 days.
So that wasn't part of
stipulation.
their use permit?
That wasn't part of their use permit.
Okay.
Couple of questions. Under that, why 5 days? What's the rationale for 5 days?
You would have to ask the applicant. I think they suggested
They
that.
proposed it? Well, then that's, okay, going down to the staff recommendations, number E, is required when necessary. What does when necessary mean?
Well, on this site, this site is back off of Currituck Highway. There is some natural buffering there, and we would have to assess the area where they're going to set aside for the medical waste transfer, and make sure that from any of the neighboring properties, that we could then make them do the type C buffer. Or there could be existing natural vegetation. I think specifically there to the east, there's probably significant natural vegetation. And then maybe even.
You can't see anything.
You got a railroad track there, too. I would like to see, when necessary, defined exactly what are we talking about. I don't want to leave it up to somebody's subjective judgment,
Okay.
because we've seen issues like this.
What's pretty common in that kind of case is to say when it adjoins, you can say when it adjoins residential property, or when it adjoins a GB, a lesser zoned property, a less intensely zoned property is kind of common practice for that type of buffer.
I would be okay with that, but I just don't like it to leave it nebulous when necessary.
So we had some stipulations in there? Okay.
That wording that Ben used. What he said.
So something basically to the effect of screening would be required when it adjoins a less intense zoning district, or a zoning district other than HI.
Yeah, 'cause if when he's done mining, whatever, if it turns into something else.
Well, right now it's agriculture on all four sides, if you get right down to it.
Well, if you just left it as a type C buffer is required.
The only thing about that is that you wouldn't want to do that if they didn't locate in an actual industrial park where there's other heavy industrial beside of it, because then there's no point to require that screening. Because it's pretty common to say residentially zoned property or less intensely zoned property is kind of common practice. So I'll leave it up to the board, but those are just two suggestions from me.
I like Ben's language.
Everybody jot that down?
Yep.
Okay. All right. All right, anything further for Ms. LaCicero? All right, this time I'll invite the applicant up to answer questions and talk to us about what they want to do.
Good evening. My name is Ed McCollum. I'm the district operations manager. Fire away. What kind of questions you got?
So describe the process.
What normally happens is we have our trucks go out to either hospitals or small quantity generators, typically tattoo parlors or small doctor's offices, dentist clinics, that sort of thing, and they'll collect generally boxes of waste, sometimes 96-gallon containers, very similar to the type you'd have at your curb for waste collection. They're red, they're locked up, They'll collect them, get signatures for the waste that they do collect. They'll bring it all back, and just like they're doing right now, they'll transfer those containers from the truck to a trailer, and in the morning time we'll pick it up and take it to one of our processing centers in Petersburg. And we'll process it with steam sterilization, render it into solid waste, and then put it into a landfill.
What was the significance of the 5-day?
In North Carolina, you've got 14 days until you have to refrigerate the waste. After that, you get another 14 days, so you have almost a month before you have to transfer it or process it. For us, we're only going to leave the waste there from Friday to Monday at the worst. So just in case maybe a weather event, something like that, at the worst, we'd have it there 5 days.
Okay.
So you're in and out of there daily, multiple trips?
Usually you leave in the morning and come back, and then you'll have one trailer arrive with clean material for the routes, switch out, grab a dirty trailer, and take it up to Petersburg.
Where's most of the waste coming from?
The bulk would be Virginia.
Virginia.
Absolutely.
So you're collecting it in Virginia, bringing it to Currituck, and then taking it back out?
Yes, ma'am. We had a very bad incident occur in Petersburg in March of 2017. A boiler exploded. It wasn't nothing we did, thank God, and no one got seriously injured. But we had to come here. This was our only option at the time. There was nowhere to really take the waste. So this developed based on an emergency situation to make sure that all the customers were both serviced and their waste was taken care of adequately. We ended up either separating the waste out to one of our other facilities in Roanoke, or sending it to our incinerator in Baltimore. So it got a little complicated during that process. We ended up keeping it just because it made sense for our business unit based out of here to pick up the routes and to get that waste where it needs to get every day.
So do you have waste coming in from, say, Raleigh or anything like that, or is it just
It
locally?
goes to my plant in Petersburg.
Okay. So okay.
Yeah, we take waste from all of North Carolina. This particular business unit services from Manio into Virginia, and from almost the Hosky all the way over. Another one of our units takes care of the rest of the state, but all that waste ultimately ends up in Petersburg.
Okay.
So when the waste comes in, it's in containers, and then you transfer it over to another storage
Into a trailer, yes, ma'am.
trailer to store it.
It's not really storage. We're filling up a trailer, and then we move that trailer within, it's not even 12 hours. That trailer's already going out of state up to Petersburg. They'll finish loading about 7 o'clock, and then we'll transfer it that next morning at about 5. It's a pretty quick process. We're not really storing waste at all. The only time we have to is and we don't have to do it, but we do it anyways, on Friday night. We finish loading the trailer, and we'll pick it up Monday morning.
Just as a point from staff, he's speaking directly to the operation that generated this text amendment, but this text amendment would apply to the entire county. I just want to make sure that point's clear.
Thank you.
And there is no processing, no handling, sorting, whatever going on. It's literally one container out of one truck into another truck.
That is correct.
Probably a good question to ask them when they do this transfer. Do the workers wear hazmat suits or anything?
No, you don't. It's not required. What we do have them use are level 9 sharps gloves, just to be on the safe side. You almost can't shoot a .22 through it, so they're pretty tough, just in case. We don't have any spills or needles because they're all locked containers, so it's pretty safe.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any problems, say, with they were leaving town and there was a wreck right out there? That how safe is the containers that it's in?
Perfectly safe. We've never had an incident. Our drivers are trained, honestly, ridiculously. They're very safe. We don't get tickets. We don't get DOT violations, nothing like that.
Y'all leave it like around 5 o'clock every morning on Monday?
About 6. Well, that waste will leave roughly around 5 o'clock, yes.
I've seen them coming out of there.
The drivers that are pulling the routes typically leave around 6:30.
I have a question for you, Mrs. Thoreau. How many areas, if we pass this ordinance, could we have this waste in the county?
All the HI zone properties, which
Approximately how many?
I'm not sure, I can, a lot.
I mean, you could have 5 of them in a HI district if they're subdivided within the
Like,
HI zone, or a park or something. Well, probably the more pertinent question is, how many people are actually in your industry transporting medical waste, would you say, regionally?
Well, I mean, of any merit, there's only us, Stericycle, and Daniels Health. And Daniels is an incredibly small company that uses either us or Stericycle for transfer and certainly for processing. We're the only, our company has the only autoclave facility in the state of Virginia, so they're not, Daniels wouldn't even, there'd be no purpose. The only real contract they have is Chesapeake Regional, and that doesn't generate that much waste. You wouldn't build it, you wouldn't even want a transfer station
Just pick it up again.
for as small as the businesses they represent.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's no noise, there's no smell.
There's no noise, there's
no-
no smell, nothing. And honestly, I know, I can tell, just the idea of medical waste in and of itself is scary. 95% of all this is gowns and gloves. We can't even transfer something like Ebola. We can't touch it. We can't get anywhere near it. Experts around the country come to us for the coronavirus and how we're going to handle it, how we're going to deal with it. We create specialized handling instructions for hospitals all over the country. This is what we do. We're very, very good at it. We've never had a violation in the contrary to what I'm telling you now. It's very safe.
Okay. Any further questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank
your time. All right, at this time, I'll open up the public hearing, and I have one person signed up tonight, Mr. Edward McCollum. Oh, that's you, okay. You did say that. Would anyone else like to speak on this agenda item this evening? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And any further discussion from the board? I'll open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move to approve PB 19-28 because the request is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the 2006 Land Use Plan, including policy ID1 or LD1 to diversify the local economy and broaden, that should be ID1, I'm sorry, to diversify the local economy and broaden the local tax base. The county shall encourage a public service and regulatory environment conducive to compatible industrial development. Compatible shall be defined as, among other things, industries that do not adversely impact the environmental quality of the area or overburden the local infrastructure. Policy ID 5, warehousing, storage, and distribution facilities shall have access to thoroughfares of adequate traffic carrying capacity and shall be approximately designed and or visually buffered according to the visibility of their location. Policy ED1, new and expanding industries and businesses shall be especially encouraged that diversify the local economy, train and utilize a more highly skilled labor force, and are compatible with the environmental quality and natural amenity-based economy of Currituck County. I also would like to add the language to staff recommendation or condition that says a type C buffer yard when the site adjoins a residential development.
Or the less,
Or downgraded.
or the less,
That's
or the
all.
less.
It's a lesser grade, right?
A lesser
Step
grade.
down,
Grade
step down in
property.
grade. Okay.
And it is reasonable and is in the public interest because it's a necessary and existing support service for the medical services industry.
Thank you, sir.
before you all vote, for staff clarification, so the change was it to a residential development or to a less intense zoning district?
Both.
Okay. And, or? Okay, or. Okay.
I'll second
that. Okay.
Before we vote, does his motion also include the other
A through
5?
F, is that what you're?
The other 5, the medical waste shall not be held for more than 5 days?
Includes
And-
staff recommendations.
Okay, all right.
And just modifying those.
That one.
Modifying E.
Number
is what
E.
you're-
Okay. Staff good? Not speaking.
Yes, sir. Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Motion clear enough?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I was
Any
right.
further
I'm sorry.
discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it carries unanimously. Thank you. All right. Next agenda. Mr. Stikeler, did you need to take a brief pause so you can get that?
It's going to keep happening.
Get that, okay.
That bottle of Dr. Jack.
Getting candy for Kitty.
I got
That's,
one on
that's
for
for
the
Ben.
mama. I know, I've got.
Uh-oh.
Something better, huh?
Oh.
Fireball was good.
I'd have
Save that.
cauterized his throat.
All right. Next item on the agenda, item B, PB 19-27, QHOC of Windswept Pines, driveway width and setbacks text amendment. Request to amend Chapter 5 of the UDO to allow driveway widths up to 40 feet when located on a street with curb and gutter section, and when the allowable lot coverage is not exceeded. The amendment also proposes to revise Chapter 3 to reduce driveway setback from the side property lines to 5 feet as opposed to the current requirement of 10 feet. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Solicitor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's a lot of words in this for what in your staff report is, when you come down to it, a very straightforward text amendment as far as the actual language that's being requested. However, it is not as straightforward as that simple change would be. There are before you essentially 2 separate text amendments, but the applicant proposed both of them. One is a driveway width. Right now, the UDO standard is 24 feet at the right-of-way line, and the applicant is proposing to change that. A separate issue, but in the same application, there's also a suggestion to eliminate reduce the side setback for driveways from 10 feet to 5 feet. So there are essentially 2 separate text amendments, but they're related in a way, and so they're on the same application. So I wanted to clarify that before we got into much of the presentation. So before you tonight, like I said, it's a simple change in the language for a couple of numbers, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Before 1989, the UDO did not really address driveway widths. We left it up to DOT because most of all our roads are either DOT maintained or private. Counties cannot build and maintain roads, so we left that prior to 1989. We left that up to DOT. So in 2005, UDO was amended to address some issues that came up because with that not having a regulation, we had really wide driveways, and it impacted specifically at the beach. We had, essentially like front yards that were all driveway where space is limited and parking's at a premium. This impacted lot coverage, runoff issues, stormwater issues, and it also resulted in wide driveways near lot lines. The mainland, where development was occurring, this also became an issue because we have smaller lots, and where we're seeing development is probably not the best draining soils, which is up in the Moyock area. So in 2005, we amended the UDO to address this issue to hopefully minimize some of the stormwater issues between properties. So the 24-foot reflects a DOT standard of 24 feet at the right-of-way. And there is a DOT staff person here, and he can address this, but DOT does allow deviations on a case-by-case basis, but their rule of thumb, their standard is 24 feet. So this text amendment before you the applicant is proposing to change that 24 feet to 40 feet in a curb and gutter environment. So more of our neighborhoods are becoming curb and gutter, and we've seen a significant increase in curb and gutter neighborhoods over the last 6 years. Once again, although this is impacting one specific neighborhood now, just like with the Curtis Bay text amendment, this would be countywide moving forward. So it impact existing and future developments. So this came about, once again, just like Curtis Bay, from a violation standpoint. There are several driveways located in Windswept Pine subdivision that have been constructed that exceed the UDO maximum of 24 feet. And this, once again, this is 24 feet is based on DOT standards. The widest of these driveways is about 38 feet, and they were constructed without receiving zoning approval of a modified site plan showing the increased width. And the applicant is also requesting to allow driveways up to 40 feet in width to resolve this issue. Once again, when you have a violation, you can correct it if you can, or a remedy moving forward is to change the rule. And essentially, that's where we are. We're asking for the rule to be changed to provide compliance with the UDO. So, and once again, there is a DOT staff member here today, and I would defer to him, but when we have spoken with them in the past, DOT could approve driveways up to 50 feet on a case-by-case basis. So here's a site plan that we received from one of these violations, and you can see there is a note on the site plan that said maximum driveway width measured at the lot line abutting the right-of-way is 24 feet. So we've had site plans, and this is very similar to the other. There are 8 violations in Windswept Pines, and I think there are 2 in maybe in Hidden Oaks for this. The 24 feet, we're back to, is 24 feet at the right-of-way line. Our driveways can then have an apron come out onto the pavement that exceeds the 24 feet, and once it's goes back into the property certain ways, it can flare out and be bigger than that 24 feet as long as it adheres to the setback, any side setback. So the 24 feet is just the width of the driveway at the right-of-way line. So here's one for lot 47 of Windswept Pines where the note is on the site plan. And here's another one with a note on the site plan, a driveway width of 24 feet.
So those driveways were done with the knowledge of that note on the site plan?
Yes, that the site plan was submitted, that note was put on the site plan. And here's an example of how wide the 30 a wider driveway is 34 feet. And once again, another 36 foot wide driveway.
And all these have the site plan stamped with that note maximum 24.
So there's that issue. We do allow a deviation in the UDO. We do allow deviations from these driveway standards, and that's 5.6.7F, deviations in the UDO. Deviations from the standards in the driveway and access standards may be approved by NCDOT upon a finding the development can achieve a satisfactory level of access control consistent with the objectives of this ordinance. So there is allowance for the deviation of the driveways. If working with DOT, we can find that these driveways can still maintain that level of access control.
The question with the side setbacks, reducing that, I'm going to jump there real quick. If I purchased a piece of property beside my neighbor knowing there was a 10-foot setback, and now you're going to say it's going to go to 5 feet, then you've changed the conditions where I bought the property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to do this prior to a neighbor's approval? Is that what you're suggesting?
That is
Okay.
Yeah. So part 2 of this text amendment there, and we'll talk more about driveways here in a few minutes, but part 2 of the setback request is a reduction of a 10-foot setback between a property line and a driveway to essentially, and parking areas to essentially 5 feet. So in all of these cases, the area of concrete did not receive approval from planning and community development, and now they're requesting a change from 10 feet to 5 feet to resolve the issue. And here is where you can see, there's a picture of this driveway encroaching into the 10-foot setback.
Yeah.
And here's another one where the driveway is encroaching into.
Couple feet.
So,
About 5'4". 5, I looked at it yesterday again.
I know when I'm setting equipment inside the homes, I got to be careful of setback, because I got rules and regulations I got to follow in here too, to stay out, that I don't overstep the setbacks.
The setback
Or I
issue.
got to move it.
So how does that get approved? Go back a slide. Wow.
it may have not been shown on the site plan. They may
I don't
have
know. I'm saying a building inspector went out. I mean,
So, and this is a discussion that we've had with as-built surveys recently. Building inspectors are only there to inspect the building code. This isn't a building code issue. We have an inspector who is very thorough and caught a zoning violation and then realized that it had occurred previously. So the as-built survey that we've talked about, and I don't want to get too wrapped around that with this conversation, but what that would do is require certifications that they met this. The only way to go around and do, it's asking an awful lot of a building inspector to know the heating, plumbing, electrical code, and all of the zoning ordinance. I mean, that's
yeah, but
asking a lot.
but I understand, but that's pretty.
Obvious.
I mean, yeah, you should be able to see that's
But-
clean 10 feet.
But what I'm saying is they don't even necessarily know to look for a 10-foot setback. I'm not saying that they wouldn't recognize it if they knew the rules, same as they would recognize stud spacing, let's say. But they don't even, I mean,
In the short term, we have corrected this, though. We have our inspectors kind of keeping an eye on it.
we've got inspectors checking this. I'm not going to say that they're not pulling a tape on everyone,
Right.
but, I mean, they're
They're just being
keeping an
aware
eye.
of it, right.
Yeah,
And
so,
if it is close, they know that they are backing to have that as-built survey.
Okay.
If they're not comfortable with what they can establish as a property line and where the structure or driveway or whatever it is, they have, they can call for as-built.
I got a question. Like, I was asked the chairman while we were talking about this, just the other day while riding around, I noticed an individual, and he lives in the county, not far from here, he's handicapped. He added onto his driveway. There's some wheelchair access to the front of his driveway. His driveway now, I think it was 32 foot, and this is just me stepping it off, so it might be 30, it might be 28, it might be 34. Prior, before, it was probably closer to the 24 range. Now, when he pulls that and adds that concrete to amend at his own house, I mean, did he have to pull any kind of permit to add onto his driveway?
He should have. Not all of our concrete people necessarily are upfront with their clients. A lot of them don't know that if you're pouring a driveway, you need a zoning permit, or you're adding on to a driveway. We've caught several since this issue has arisen where people have gone in and had lots of concrete poured and they don't meet the setback. So they're either going to have to seek relief through a text amendment, or they're going to have to get out the concrete saw and comply with the setbacks.
there is one other solution available to people. You spoke about someone who needs it for wheelchair access. There is a process through the Board of Adjustment called a variance. But now, that might suffice. One of the rules you have to meet to do that is you can make no reasonable use of your property without the variance.
Yeah.
So not being able to access your house with a wheelchair would meet that, but not being able to park your car where you want it probably does not meet that threshold. So there's some nuance there.
And there's also flexibility for ADA, for American Disabilities Act, for accommodations of that. And that's been codified in the new legislation 160D as well that will come before you later this year.
So here's part of the challenge that I have is that, when the subdivision comes before us, they show us the elevations, they show us the layouts, they show us the concrete thing, where all the concrete's going to be, You've got a model home that has the same kind of drawings and sketches and elevations on it. So, homeowner A paves his entire yard. Homeowner B expects to have a normal yard next door, signs a contract, goes to move in, and winds up
What's that?
with that. I mean, that's pretty significant.
I mean, the significance of the 10-foot, and like I said, I walk 3 neighborhoods that are a mile from here. River's Edge being one. And I know River's Edge started in '03, so I know this might be prior. There is probably 50-some in River's Edge that are under the 10-foot. So, I mean, I don't know when they were built, but there's an easy.
But that's a different
That's
animal.
I mean, like this one's a little, you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, like, I'm talking about the 10-foot between property lines, depending on when they were. I mean, I'll say it on TV, mine's 8.5 foot from my neighbor. I bought the house that way.
You guys got to go out tomorrow.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just asking, like,
Consider it.
yeah, I'm just
Consider it
it's going to be
anonymous.
nice. It's going to be 70 tomorrow. Hey. But like I said, I'm just curious. Like, there's some neighborhoods, like today, I rode through, what is it in Grandy? Waterside Village. Man, they're, between me and Mike. There's a couple of them that way. I mean, so not to throw that neighborhood on the bus, hope nobody in here lives in Waterside Village, but I mean, it's countywide. It's everywhere.
Well, so the question is, what do we do about it going forward? That's what we're here
Yeah,
for
that's-
tonight.
yeah.
Not and do we as a county want to allow? Well, we got DOT as a problem. They can reject the neighborhood at some future point because of the cuts to the curb, right?
And you've got the applicant who still needs to present,
so
and
the
you've got
president.
a representative from DOT
Right.
who is here to answer any DOT questions that you
But
might
the,
have.
the only thing I'll add, I'm a mechanical contractor, and I know the codes in my line of work. And when somebody asks me to move a piece of equipment to the side of the house, first thing I'm going to look at is the boundaries and see how far that unit's going to be, the edge of that unit to the boundary line, to know if I'm going to be able to do it or not. And I let the homeowner up front know that, no, I can't do that because this regulation says I cannot. So I check into that, and so I just,
Question, how much time elapsed from the first CO being granted that had this violation to when it was caught 7 houses later?
I believe the first one was caught in April or May.
When the first CO was,
No, that was,
First violation.
the first violation was noticed. So
when was the CO granted on that one?
that one of the CO was granted in late April, I think early May, when we noticed the violation.
So did that trigger the investigation of the other 7?
Yes. And that's when we found these others. So,
Owen, I think the question that you're trying to get at, because I think what Owen's trying to ask is the earliest CO of these 7. And once again, we're getting kind of wrapped around these 7 or 8, but there's more to it. But the very first CO that was issued for the 7 or 8 was issued at this date. And then how long was it until we noticed the problem?
I can answer that.
And like I said, we still have the applicant.
Bring you up
and-
in a
yeah.
minute.
So, and
Okay.
yeah. So I think that's what you're trying to get at. Is that right?
How much time elapsed, and, because, we've got to talk about the homeowners.
Yeah.
They're the ones that's got the violations later.
Correct.
Right, and that's an important caveat that's missing in this discussion is the homeowner buys this, thinks the property's good to go, they come back along and find out they just bought a house that's in violation.
Well,
they're
and
stuck with the bill.
staff,
And you guys have,
staff worked with the homeowners, and as far as enforcement processes went, we understand the difficult situation that the homeowners have been placed in. So staff worked with them and didn't move directly into the normal enforcement proceedings that you would see.
But we have one homeowner who wants to improve his property by putting a swimming pool in, and they can't get a permit because a violation sits there.
And because our ordinance states that if you have an open violation, you can't,
Right.
we can't grant you a permit until you fix that.
I
So,
think there's 2 different animals here we're talking about.
And also, I think about my neighbor. He wanted to put a barn. He's surrounded by our garden and farmland behind his house, and he had to dig his whole driveway up because the county said he had too much cement. I mean, if we're going to make one person do something, it should be across the board. And he had to pay to have his cement driveway removed.
That was a different scenario, right? He
Well-
wanted
Well,
to do something, and to do that, he had to get from A to B.
Reminds me of a second question. Are we now going to go look for driveways that have been poured, say, in the last 5 years that exceeds this in all residential developments?
If we receive a complaint on it or an encroachment into the setback, we will look for it. I do not have the staff to go out and measure. This would be for, new construction coming forward to make sure that the site plans adhere to whether it's 40 feet or 24, and then that those criteria are met.
So an existing neighborhood, let's say, that's 25 years old, and somebody goes in and widens their driveway to 40 feet, are they in violation?
They would be at this point if they're widening it. If they come in today and get a permit and want to widen it greater than 24 feet, they would be.
So even though that under the rule they built under 20 years ago allowed for a driveway of any width.
That's common in all of our, in all of our rules, it's common that
They wouldn't have a vested right to what they bought and built.
I'll let the attorney answer, but the way that I've always seen zoning rules enforced, once the code changes, if you want to add to your property, you have to meet the code as it is at that time.
What they have at the time that the ordinance changes would be a legal nonconformity. If it was legal at the time, or legal under the ordinance under which they built.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
I have more presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Planning and engineering, these were our main concerns with greater than a 24-foot width. The applicant is proposing this in just curb and gutter neighborhoods, but that curb and gutter is factored into their stormwater plan and their stormwater permit. So we were concerned about that will typically, curb and gutter environment is going to drain directly to the street, and depending on the slope, layout, and the pervious area and design of the lot, more area could be draining into the street via the driveway. So then larger driveways would mean more direct runoff to curb and gutter section, which drain to the catch basins and outlets. And we're concerned that with these wider driveways, that the existing gutters and catch basins and the existing infrastructure may not be can handle this additional runoff, is one of our concerns. We will also need verification from DOT, and we've started that process, that any altered infrastructure will still meet their standards and carrying capacities for any concerns that they have over drainage. And we're also concerned about the amount of water that could sheet flow not across the road into driveways or neighboring properties across the road. We have been in contact. I met with the DOT staff about this, and like I said, I would leave him to speak to that in a little while. But there is some concern about driveways that are exceeding the 24-foot width being accepted into the DOT system, because we're a county, we do not build and maintain roads. So then the county and DOT will need to work together on this. And we're also concerned about stormwater runoff and aesthetics, and also safety, as far as having those wide driveways. And if you have, 4 or 5 cars parked there at the sidewalk, as they're pedestrians, there are issues with pedestrian safety and vehicular. As far as the setbacks, one of the overarching goal of the driveway setback was to minimize runoff onto your neighbor's property. The current UDO is 10 feet for driveways and parking areas, and this provides more pervious area in between the end of the driveway and the lot line to hopefully kind of reduce some runoff from your neighbors onto your neighbor's property. This larger area will provide more area for infiltration running off the driveway, and lot line swells are required in all new subdivisions, and this could be these lot line swells, which are the main conveyance of getting water off the property into the rest of the stormwater system, they could be impacted by these increased setbacks. So the staff recommendation was the denial of this text amendment request due to the concerns expressed there from Planning and Community Development and the county engineer. Planning Board had a different recommendation. They recommended denial of the driveway width to 40 feet, but because we do have that caveat about deviations of these standards, of our driveway standards, they did want county staff to work with DOT to assess the potential for deviations to achieve a satisfactory level of access control. We have I've met with David Otts, who's here tonight, last week to begin this process to assess the existing driveways. The second part of the recommendation was to keep the side setbacks for driveways and parking areas at 10 feet, but they recommended they can be reduced to 5 feet with an engineer certification that the encroachment would not negatively impact drainage on neighboring properties. So that was staff recommendation and planning board recommendations, and if you all have any further questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Do most people get the deviation before they build?
Well, that was something that came out during this process that, for DOT, and this is where we're kind of caught. For DOT maintain roads, if there's going to be anything that exceeds 24 feet, they would be in contact with us and say, there's a specific reason why this needs to be wider. It's a rule, there's certain standards or certain criteria that they would expect. I forgot where I was going with that. But yes, but because these are, right now, they're private streets, still either maintained by the developer, if they haven't been turned over, they haven't met that threshold, they could be potentially homeowners, so associations that are maintaining these at this point. They're not DOT roads, so they don't have to go through the DOT process to get a driveway, to get a driveway permit. So we're kind of caught in this. It's our standard, but it reflects a DOT standard. So yes, that would be. We would have preferred this had been done prior to.
If we were to approve this, and then I can't wait to hear from DOT. But if we approve this and then NCD comes in and says, well, we're not going to take over the road now because you did this, the homeowners bought with the assumption that they could possibly be taken over eventually, and now they won't, and there's another slippery slope.
We just went to the homeowners association meeting.
Yeah, I know.
And they're having problems having DOT
roads,
take over their roads. Complicating this at all is
Well, I just keep going back with the setback change too. When you got an existing homeowners that purchased knowing that their setback was 10 feet, and now we're gonna change something and say, well, we're gonna move it 5 feet closer now, and they're like, well, that's not what I bought. So, anyways, we'll move forward and listen to who's.
Got a couple of more questions. Why can't we ask that DOT submit or look at this at TRC and say yay or nay? And to address the stormwater, if the developer wants to have wider driveways, have their engineering, their stormwater plan reflect the additional flow of water that is possible at TRC.
We can. DOT is on our TRC committee, and they have gone through some staff changes over this last year, and they are now to the point that they are more engaged with us. They went through a few months where there was staff being spread thin, but now they do attend TRC meetings. So they could, if this was something that every new subdivision that's going to be curb and gutter wants 40-foot driveways, that would be something that they could weigh in on at TRC during the subdivision approval process. That would be, and also as far as, that would be one of the requirements of increased driveway width would be that they would need to verify that those stormwater calculations are still that their stormwater infrastructure could handle any additional stormwater runoff
Yeah,
with those calculations.
so they could calculate it out, or model it to say that every driveway we're going to do is 40 feet.
They could,
But on the original plans, these were 24.
yes.
And that raises the question again, we're talking about from here going forward, but it doesn't necessarily address the 8 people that are caught in this crux.
Well, if the standard is changed, and then that standard would then be what's in effect,
Right.
there would be no violation for the exceeding the 24-foot width.
I think we have a little bit of a remedy possibly. We'll have to hear from DOT representative, but Mr. Stikeweather and I were talking about that before the meeting, that there may be a way out.
The code currently allows for some deviation as long as DOT signs off on it. And that's what Commissioner Etheridge, the other one, was referring to, is that typically that would occur on the front end. And like I said, but I'll let DOT speak to how they feel about these driveways and the amendment. I'm not sure. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. LaCicero, are you wrapped up at this point?
Yes, that is the end of
Okay.
my,
Any further questions from Ms. LaCicero? All right. I guess at this time, let's hear from Mr. Otts, since he's here, and then we'll move on to the applicant.
Good evening, David Otts, the district engineer for the Department of Transportation in Elizabeth City.
Good evening. So you've been following the discussion along and been through email exchanges and
Yes,
I
sir.
assume
I've
things
actually
going on?
been following this discussion, was privy to some previous discussions that the prior district engineer had, Randy Mitchell, with Mr. Bissell, and so we are up to speed.
Okay. What say you?
Well, our policy will be based around 2 things, mobility and, well, safety primarily, mobility second. From a safety standpoint, we look at driveway widths based on mainly commercial properties, where you've got cars going in and out, we don't want any conflicts, and, we don't have that with driveways. Secondly, in this case, we'd be looking at unnecessary maintenance to the taxpayers or to the department. But that would normally occur when you're looking at a ditch section in a more rural area, with driveway pipe. Here, we just simply basically driving over the curb. It's the same as it is along the rest of the property, and then we don't maintain the driveways behind the curbs. So at this point, there's no unnecessary maintenance for the department with the current driveways.
Okay, so that being said, so you would just maintain the blacktop, basically, right? If you took over this, the curb itself would not be your problem?
The curb would be our problem.
Okay.
The storm drain beneath the curb would be our problem, but the actual driveway surface itself would not be ours. They've got a roll-type curb rather than a conventional 2-foot,
Right.
6-inch curb and gutter, and it does not deviate from across the front of their property or through the driveway. It remains the same the whole way across the property.
So how would this then affect, if we make this change, that's going to allow the whole county to do this? So you're willing to take on the whole county then at this point?
No, sir.
No,
You're just talking about this one specific?
We're just talking about this one
Okay.
parcel, or these 8 properties, yes, sir.
Okay.
So our policy is written, and a quote from our policy on street and driveway manual is that we would consider wider driveways on a case-by-case basis only after justifications of actual necessity. It's not uncommon for people to want driveways wider than 24 foot. Generally, that would be people that, purchased a camper, purchased a boat, live on a narrow street, but, have trouble getting in and out of their driveway. And at that point, we would often grant them a wider driveway access.
Okay.
Would be an example of what would allow wider access.
and under our current ordinance, if they did that, that is allowed. We do allow that deviation with NCDOT, making a finding of fact about access control.
yes, that was a deviation section that I read to you all earlier. That we do, working with DOT, if they make a finding, maintain same level of access control, there is potential for deviation.
But that's in the front.
Are you, well, in this particular case, are you guys willing to make that finding of fact and basically go on record with this?
Well, that's kind of difficult, a little, I guess, premature, being the road hasn't been petitioned yet.
Right.
There's some other things we would look at once the road gets petitioned. One thing we did notice when we met with Lori, last week is that some people that do not have these wider driveways are actually driving over the curb through their yards to get to some of these parking areas. So, that could get unsafe if there were, mud in the road, things like that. So it's, there's other things we would have to take into account once the road is petitioned for addition.
Okay, all right.
So what you're saying is what's existing there today would not impede DOT from taking it over, just the driveways?
Not from what I saw last week, no, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further? No?
No,
Okay.
if we do this change, it's going to be for the whole county.
Right.
That means the Outer Banks, everything.
Well, now, and I would point out, too, that if there was a change, our regulations will be the more stringent at the time.
The different zoning district.
Well, we're probably getting premature on that, but just, Mr. Otts, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you coming.
Can I ask him one quick question?
Of course.
Does any of those yards, like you said, I know it's the NCDOT, like none of those with the water driveway, they don't violate any of the permeable area for the yard, does it?
That wouldn't be a DOT policy as far as
That's
the
not him.
permeable
That's
area
us.
in the yard.
That's us.
Well, that's where the engineer,
Yeah.
And that's part of this text amendment. It would be in curb and gutter neighborhoods, so it wouldn't be all neighborhoods that would allow this, and as long as each lot maintained or stayed under their maximum lot coverage.
All right, you good? Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right, this time I'll ask the applicant to come forward. And did Justin give you the information on the dates?
I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I'll remind you guys to just state your name and for the record, please.
Justin Old, 131 Springle Lane.
Thank you.
Good morning, or good evening, board. I was just up here to answer Mr. Etheridge's question. The first CO was issued on one of the wider driveways in November of 2018.
And so to follow up, it was April, May of 19 whenever the inspector called it.
6 months later.
Yep.
And I think the 7 were prior to, in the interim of him catching them. So
Time frame.
the first one was November 18.
Okay.
And Mark can take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Bissell.
So, just to provide a little bit of history on this, we received a call in May of last year when there was a problem with a CO and I think this is the first time that this problem had been noticed. And so we looked at it, and that's when we saw the provision in there that allowed a deviation on a case-by-case basis with approval from DOT. So, and I think you have an email in your packet from when I first emailed Randy Midget to ask if this is something that DOT would approve, and he said he felt that they would, but that county planning had the ultimate jurisdiction over it, the ultimate approval authority over it. And shortly after that, I think it was when it was discovered that there were 7 other situations that had already been issued COs some weeks or even months ahead of that. And so there was concern about whether the right approach was to seek variances from DOT on all 8 of them, or should we pursue a text amendment that would be a little more encompassing. And in discussions with staff, it appeared that the text amendment at the time was the way to go. And what we had crafted initially was a text amendment that was much narrower than this one, that would have made it much more difficult to get an approval than what you see in front of you. But it kind of evolved over time and it became more encompassing. And since then, there have been other agencies that have expressed concern, like Stormwater, and DOT is concerned about making this as broad as this current text amendment makes it. The Planning Board actually recommended, initially they wanted to table it at the last meeting. And their thought was that, well, let's table it and find out if these 8 property owners can work with DOT to have these driveways accepted, and then come back and see if there's even a need for the text amendment. What we discovered was that their time had run and they had to make a decision, so that's why they recommended denial rather than tabling. So at this point, we're really okay with that recommendation. If you all wanted to table it until we could.
Well, at this point, they haven't asked for the neighborhood to be accepted into the DOT roadway system,
No, they
so
haven't.
they would not grant that request, would they not? Is that correct to say?
I would have to ask Mr. Otts if he would, he met me out there, we've discussed the driveway, so they may weigh in on.
Okay.
Laurie, the section of the ordinance that allows the deviation, can you read that one more time?
Deviations from the standards in 5.6 driveway and access standards may be approved by NCDOT upon the finding that the development can achieve a satisfactory level of access control consistent with the objectives of this ordinance.
So from our ordinance standpoint, it doesn't require the petitioning of it to become a state road. It's really a matter of what DOT is comfortable putting in writing.
Right.
That finding can be made, then.
But that's probably a question for Mr. Otts.
I think so. Yeah.
Mr. Bissell, help me then just understand, if these site plans had the measurements on it, and they were built to what was presented, would we even be here?
I can't answer that question. We didn't do
I don't
the
think
site
we would be.
plans.
I don't think we would be.
You know, I think
Okay.
I think there were errors made on a number of people's parts that, and we're just trying at this point
Whose decision ultimately was it to exceed the 24-foot standard? Whose decision was that?
I think decisions were made between the homeowners and
The
the
homeowners
job
requested it?
superintendents who were on site.
Did the homeowners requested it, that exceed that?
I believe so.
So, yeah, they
And they also paid for it, correct?
Yeah, but they're relying on the expertise and who's ever reporting at that time to know the rules and regulations at that time. You can't fault the homeowner for that.
But we do.
And I don't know if you can fault the site superintendent who's just there to oversee construction. He wouldn't know the ordinance.
No, but he has a site plan in front of him. He knows it says stamp 24 feet. Can I say one thing to that? In the same instance that Ben said their building inspectors don't know the code or setback from the planning perspective, our site superintendents who don't have those stamped site plans, that's in the office. They're the same thing. They're there building the house, and they meet on site with the homeowners when it comes to concrete layouts to ask for additional stuff. Those guys, in the same respect to a building official, don't know that there's a 10-foot But setback. the people pouring the concrete, don't they have to go by something to understand where they're putting a driveway?
They lay it out in the field.
Yeah, but
They
what
don't-
do they lay it out by?
By
Just,
hand.
I mean, by recommendations, or they go by what's drawn and presented on?
Well, typically you see this occurring on the third car garage,
Okay.
which have become more predominant over the last couple of years. So typically they'll come out from a 22-foot driveway or garage and straight out. I mean, it's just a standard
Mm-hmm.
practice. Sometimes people want something beside it for an RV or some additional,
Right,
vehicle.
and I appreciate that. So what you're saying is the individuals that pour the concrete don't pay attention to site drawings?
They don't have, no,
They don't. They wouldn't
the
do it.
concrete
Okay.
contractors do not have site
Okay.
plans on
All
them.
right,
no.
so they're just pouring whatever is requested?
Well, no, they
Okay.
meet with the field superintendent and they lay a driveway out. They don't go by a standard
Okay.
site plan. I mean, they lay it out in the field.
Well, you guys have a kind of a standard. If it's a two-car garage, it gets a 24-foot wide driveway, basically, right? I mean, would be a normal.
Correct, as long
Right.
as there's no additional structure, for an RV or anything to that
Right.
nature.
So, and then you contract with the homeowner to build the property, and the homeowner says, "Hey, I need some more concrete poured for X or Y or Z reason."
They meet every-
No problem. It's X amount per yard, right?
Correct. They meet every homeowner on site
Right.
to lay out additional concrete.
Just like if they added an extra light fixture in the garage or something like the same thing.
Same difference, yeah. And like I said, our site superintendents aren't planning staff either. I mean, they don't know the setbacks.
Okay.
In the packet that we had, it says that the builder asked him, which was Chris Cromwell, if he wanted to pay for a larger driveway. So who was he asking when it says, who was the builder?
It would be the site superintendent. I can tell you, I mean, I know Lori's mentioned Windswept Pines multiple times, but a lot of those pictures were neighboring communities, and this isn't one specific community this is in. we've been approached by neighboring communities who have permits on hold because of the same situation, so.
And there are multiple builders in Windswept Pines as well.
Exactly, we're not the only ones in there either.
But I think
so.
the situation has been elevated now to where people
We're in
are
the
generally aware of it. Yeah.
Mr. Bissell, you got to stay on the spotlight. You're up here too much. Okay.
I would also like Mark to speak. He's a little more versed on. Okay.
The second part.
Right,
Okay, yeah.
right. Yep. All right. Thank you.
So about the same time as when a notice of violation was issued for a side setback violation, which was also at Windswept Pines, and this was for a driveway that extended 2 feet into the side setback because of a parking situation that was beside the driveway, similar to one of the, you don't have that actual photo in there, but similar to that. And at the time, it looked like a variance might be the way to go, and we started pursuing that, but it became quickly obvious that that was not going to be a successful endeavor. And in the meantime, we discovered that there were similar problems in other neighborhoods, particularly Moyock Crossing and possibly Countryside Estates, that had similar problems. So that's when it looked like maybe a text amendment was the way to go on that as well. And just to back up a minute, this 10-foot side setback wasn't always there. And it's a fill setback as well as a driveway setback. And I believe that it came into effect mainly because of older subdivisions that had undeveloped lots, where the older lots had not a lot of fill that was put in there back in the old days. Newer lots are coming in and putting 2 or 3 feet of fill for their septic systems and their drainage to work properly. And so now you have this disparity between the new construction and the old construction, with runoff being channeled onto the adjacent properties. And so that's, I believe, where the standard came from. The way we typically do things in the newer subdivisions is to do a mass fill, where you essentially are grading the lots and the streets all at once and then cutting a swale into the fill. So your side-by-side lots are essentially at the same elevation. There is a provision in the stormwater management section of the UDO that says that subdivisions shall provide side lot line swales with a minimum average depth of 12 inches and side slopes not to exceed 3 to 1. So if you can go back, can we look at one of those photographs that you had of the swale situation? Yeah, that one's a good one. So you can see that these swales are fairly shallow. This might start at 6 inches deep in the front and be 1.5 feet deep in the back, so it achieves that average 12-foot depth. In the middle, where the driveway encroachment, if it's 12 inches deep at a 3 to 1 slope, then the width of that swale would be 9 feet, or about 4.5 feet on either side of the driveway, or I mean either side of the property line. So that's where this 5 foot came from. Plus, we have existing situations where we know that they have encroached 4 or 5 feet, and we're also trying to help those people solve their problems. Let me also point out, though, that 10-foot setback is not uniform in all zoning districts. There are a number of zoning districts where the setback is less than 10 feet. For example, you have the community center district, where you're actually allowed to build up to 3 feet from a side yard setback.
And that's typically commercial district.
And the village center, it's a mixed use.
And village center's mixed use, and it's typically on the Outer Banks.
Community center is typically on the mainland, right?
Correct.
With a minimum 30% residential. You also have all the planned development districts where setbacks are set by the applicant.
Yes, it's done. That's done through in the plan development through the terms and conditions and their master plan. All that's done. And that-
So my point is that it's certainly possible to design a drainage system and to have a drainage system that doesn't need the full 20 feet in order to not impact the neighbor. There's also provisions in the UDO for the county engineer to sign off on modifications to the drainage system with a certification that surface water not be channeled onto adjacent property as a result. So you have a number of provisions. For example, 7.3.4, you have the swale dimensions that I said, unless the county engineer approves an equivalent drainage alternative.
Real quick, Ms. Lucifer, didn't the our county engineer, did he approve this or deny this?
He recommended denial.
He recommended
Okay.
denial. He had concerns that that this reduced setback. County staff, I say we fought long, but I mean, we understand the drainage issues that we have here, and we understand that the more impervious surface we have and the closer it is to a setback, the greater potential it has to have on a neighbor. So the county engineer was not in favor of changing the setback.
I believe his concerns were twofold. One was opening it up to a very general standard change that will allow 5-foot setbacks everywhere, and the other was the additional workload that might put on staff to review all of those changes.
Did the false SUP we approved last meeting, does that fall under the 3-foot setback?
It would be, it's a PDR, so they can establish their own setback in that, and I don't have that in front of me right now to know what the setback is.
But they could go up to whatever they decide to be the setback, if I understood what Mr. Bissell said.
It would be part of their terms and conditions and part of their overall site plan, so they could establish something that is different than the 10-foot setback.
So, question maybe Mr. Stikelether can answer. When the county engineer reviews the engineered plans that come forward with a seal on it, how deep do they go in terms of review, or do they accept what the sealed engineering plan says?
I think it's very common practice in the engineering field. Mr. Bissell could speak to this, for fellow engineers to grant a certain level of competency to the seal of another engineer. We have 2 licensed engineers on staff. We've got one of those who is busy constructing the Public Safety Center, ABC building, various other projects, and the other one is focused heavily on service districts and utilities. So our engineers, our staff engineers, are not engineers to review private plans. We rely heavily on engineers, and not just Mr. Bissell's company, but other companies that come before you all, to put their credibility and their license on the line to say that what they're saying is accurate, honest, and will be effective.
So with that being said, this wouldn't necessarily increase the workload on staff engineers.
I couldn't let it increase the workload on staff engineers. If the requirement is that staff engineers have to look at it, it would. But I will be totally upfront. We do not have the capacity in our engineering department at this time for them to review review a single house and its setbacks. We just don't.
So I'd also like to point out then that there are 2 provisions in Section 10 of the UDO. One is paragraph B under 10.3.4 that allows setback exemptions. Fill and land disturbance setbacks shall not apply to fill necessary for installation of driveways subject to approval by the county engineer. Lots served by a shared driveway are exempted. Handicap ramps, fences, walls are exempt as long as they may encroach into a required setback but shall not impede the flow of stormwater. And then paragraph C, allowable setback encroachments, allows porches, decks, patio steps, sidewalks, and similar features to encroach into a required setback provided they do not impede the flow of stormwater. And then public facilities, public walkways, boardwalks, sidewalks, and gazebos are allowed, which doesn't have the provision about not impeding stormwater. So there's certainly lots of exemptions and exceptions and allowable encroachments into these setbacks. Can we go back to the planning board recommendation, please? So the planning board recommendation, planning board again wanted to table this to see if these issues could be resolved by doing certifications that the county engineer would accept on these particular instances without negatively impacting drainage. And but again, they didn't have the ability to table it, so they recommended that it be kept at 10 feet, but it can be reduced on a case-by-case basis with an engineer's certification that it won't negatively impact the drainage. So we think that it is a reasonable solution.
Mr. Bissell, the concern I have, maybe you can answer it, is the other individuals in this neighborhood that have purchased property with the understanding that they're purchasing a 10-foot setback. Do they have any issues in that whole neighborhood with saying, I'll reduce my setbacks now to get closer? Or are we just talking about these specific locations?
Well, the one case that we're aware of in Windswept Pines actually adjoins open space in a pond. The ones that, the two that we're aware of in Moyock Crossing, you've seen on the slides, and it appears that the swales are kind of shallow and broad.
I could build in a 10-foot setback. I could, if I hated my neighbor, I could build a small berm and build a landscape to separate and put some Russian olives or something down in between that thing.
Not within 10.
If you're going to put
Who's going to come out and check it out?
If you reduce it to 5-foot setback and you want to put a
You have
fence in
before.
there, if they reduce that to 5-foot setback closer to the swell and then they want to put a fence down the side, how far could you stay off the property line then?
It varies when HOAs and stuff like that.
Okay.
I mean, are we going to, I mean.
Were these?
No, I was just.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I'm just
I mean,
curious about the neighbors in there.
What were there any drainage issues last fall when the storm, when Dorian came? What kind of the stormwater with these concrete slabs that are covering a larger part of the lot? Were there any drainage issues because of it?
Not that I'm aware of. And again, we're just talking about a side property line swale that drains, portions of two lots and carries it to the back.
In the back, I assume you have a larger ditch
And
back
we
there
carry
to
it to
convey
a
the
collector
water
swale
down
in
to
the
your,
back in
right.
most cases.
There's ponds in the back.
Like a
Is
retention
there
pond?
there's ponds on both sides of it, isn't it? 3, yeah. I knew there was 2. I wouldn't.
Okay. Anything further, Mr. Bissell?
That's the end of my pitch.
Okay.
Answer any questions.
So, is it fair to say that you currently have, so you said there's one in Windswept Pines, but it adjoins an open space, so it's not going to be a problem for encroachment on that driveway. And there was 2 other homes. Were those pictured in Ms. LaCicero's presentation? And those neighbors.
And those property owners are here as well, I believe.
Okay.
To remind the board, once again, it's a text amendment for the entire county.
Right.
Yes.
So it would have impacts outside of. Now, it is just for curb and gutter.
Well, here's the thing. Going forward, though, if we change this, going forward, the next neighborhood that Mr. Bissell builds or any other developer builds, they're going to have this in it. I mean, it's going to be
Pave the whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
So-
Why I asked, could it be looked at TRC and approval given coming forward
Right.
instead of waiting until after the fact?
well, the 24-foot, the greater than 24-foot driveway width would be only in the curb and gutter environment, curb and gutter neighborhoods. The reduction of the setback will be in all residential-based zoning districts throughout the county.
Right.
So it wouldn't just be for curb and gutter, it would be throughout the county.
And you could add the provision that if it's approved at TRC, at the plan review stage going forward, I would say.
The other concern with a reduced setback, and especially if it goes to 5 foot on each side, potentially, is we have in the event of a structure fire, I mean, I know emergency response and firefighting was one of the reasons why we've had increased setbacks in the county as it is. And if you have two neighbors who each go 5 foot into the setback, you could have 10 feet between.
Well, in this case, the only, I guess the only things allowed in that setback currently would be a
Driveway.
fence.
Yes.
Fence.
Right? So
Fence and landscaping.
Fence and landscaping currently. So even if we change to allow the driveway to go in, your fence and landscaping would still be, in this case, you might not be able to do that because your drainage is going to be affected.
Have to come out,
Right.
offset.
And we're okay with it being limited to existing situations with the county engineer or with the engineering certification on the drainage.
We just got to be careful because we got to look out for the whole county when this gets approved. Because if it does, then, yeah. I mean, how much right now would that affect the county, with the curb and gutter? I mean, we have a lot of, what's that?
Almost all of our
New stuff.
subdivisions.
Newer
going-
subdivisions are
like
going to
that.
be curb
Going
and gutter.
forward and then
Yeah.
Outer Banks much, or? Nothing down there then?
Can't we
What's down there?
just say on mainland residential?
You could make
Oh,
that,
that's a sub-area, right?
right. You can make,
Because Grawl falls under mainland,
Broad.
residential beach or something to that.
Yeah.
That's right, it is the beach, yeah.
It's beach residential or something like that.
What's, Kevin, thought? Okay. All right. Anything further from Mr. Bissell?
Anything from 2006 beyond, if it's 10 feet between neighbors, it's a violation. And if it's over 24 feet, it's a violation from 2006, correct?
I'm going to let Ms. LaCicero speak to that. I don't think that's entirely accurate because there's some nuance to, curb and gutter neighborhoods, but she'll be able to answer that far better than I could.
well, we do allow a 3-foot encroachment into the setback for, like Mr. Bissell was saying, for steps, sidewalks, awnings, things of that nature. We do allow that. Now, site plans should not have been approved once the standard was in effect for anything greater than 24 feet or closer than 10 feet into the setback. Those are, if they came through and got approval. There's plenty of instances where things were done.
Somebody did something extra at the end.
Somebody did something extra at the end. They did something without coming in and getting the permit. We do not have the staff to go out and.
Oh, yeah, it'd be a nightmare.
And to be, yeah. Now, that being said, this is, we have site plans that were stamped approved, that met our standards in effect at the time. So,
And I will just say, as far as the driveways, if DOT is good with that and they're going to maintain it, yeah, that's fine. It's the setback I'm struggling with right now, is trying to figure out how to overcome that setback option. And that's why I really haven't got a good feeling yet if we got that resolved.
But DOT hasn't guaranteed they were going to take it over. That's what I worry about.
But he did say the driveway width would not impact this particular
Project.
subdivision.
All right.
Like I said, Mr. Otts is still here if you have any questions. Like I said, I don't want staff to speak for NCDOT, so
Right.
we're fortunate. Yeah.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a 5-minute recess, and then we'll call Mr. Otts back up here and proceed with this. So at this point, we'll just take a brief 5-minute recess. Thank you. Discussion out there in the gallery and up here. All right, at this time, I'd like to call Mr. Otts back up, if you would, for a minute, sir. And apparently we're unclear on what you guys will. So looking at what you've seen here today, at this particular time, if this came before DOT for inclusion into your network, you guys would not, you don't foresee a problem at this point in time. Is that a fair statement?
With the 8 that are there right now, as we looked at them back
Okay.
in January, we do not see a problem.
Okay. Okay.
What would your preference be for the size of the driveway? What would DOT's preference be?
It would still be a 24-foot maximum would be our preference with the size of the driveway. Like I say, maintenance costs are important to us. While we do not maintain the driveway, in this particular case, we maintain the curb and gutter as well as the storm drain beneath it. If we had to access that storm drain, it would do substantial damage to the driveway as well as the roadway. So, just to keep maintenance down, we like to keep driveways as narrow as possible, as narrow as necessary.
Okay.
Did you attend the TRC meeting?
No, ma'am, but I've actually while I've been with the Department of Transportation for 20 years, I've only been district engineer since, I believe, May.
Okay.
Anybody from DOT?
I'm unsure if Randy Midget attended the TRC for this particular one or not.
Okay.
I don't know that he's ever been to a commissioner's meeting.
He actually came with me 2 weeks ago, so yeah, but we're definitely on a roll.
All right. Anything further?
How about on the setbacks?
That's not them.
That's not them.
Yeah. They're just concerned with where their pavement touches the driveway, basically.
And with those
So,
eight existing, he's fine with it.
Mr. Cycleather, one of the concerns is the notice of violations that we currently have.
Mm-hmm.
With what Mr. Otts has said, does that alleviate that portion of the violations, or do we have to still seek enforcement?
I think it meets it with a caveat.
Okay.
I think we need something in writing that lays out the language that's in our ordinance, that they feel that there's that it meets the access control standards.
There's a necessity, and it meets the objectives of the access control of our ordinance. And we've worked together on another driveway on Tolls Creek Road where it exceeded our standards, and he gave me emails setting out the criteria for why it was needed.
Okay.
And if I can say this, I think that Ms. LaCicero spoke to the staffing issues that NCDOT has had. I have been impressed with their speed of their response since they've gotten fully staffed, which is understandable. They have been very understaffed for a while. So I think that going forward, there will be quick communication back and forth if a driveway, like Ms. LaCicero just alluded to, needs that signature, especially ahead of time. That makes it much easier.
Okay. So it appears we have somewhat of a path out of this little situation at this point in time. With the driveway.
With the 8 existing driveways.
Right. The setbacks are the second portion of this that's
Well,
an issue.
and could I point out one thing?
Please.
With the text amendment, like we talking about earlier, our regulations will be the more stringent of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So if Currituck was to allow 40-foot drives, that would require a letter from the DOT on every single drive in excess of that. Right now, Currituck County is kind of the front line and has done a very good job keeping everybody within our regulations. So, I would really hate to see that change. Like I say, the 8 like they are right now, we're on board with. But text amendment would create a lot of work for both Currituck County and the Department of Transportation, consistently writing letters for over-width driveways.
Got a question then with that. If the developer comes in and asks for a deviation on every driveway, you've got to address that though, right?
Yes, sir, but what we would prefer to see, and I think we tried to detail it in the letter that was sent, would be for that to be handled at the TRC level or, during a plan review for them to have on their plats
Oh, yeah,
what they
that's
were
what I'm
intending to
getting
do,
at.
and then we could blanket handle it for an entire subdivision, for instance.
And that's what I was asked. That's the reason I asked the question. If
Yes,
we
sir.
handle it at TRC, it shouldn't be a problem from there on.
But your preference, if I heard you correctly, your preference would not to not see a change in UDO to allow 40-foot driveways.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anything further? Thank you again for coming back. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
no
your time.
problem at all.
Okay. At this time, I'll open public comment. And I have Keith Blaine signed up this evening. Sir, if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Keith Blaine. I live at 1009 Hidden View Loop in Moyock Crossing. Before we purchased this property, from from the developer, from Ryan Holmes. We asked the question about putting a two-car garage on the property and make sure it was wide enough to facilitate that. And we also got approval from the developer, in constraints with the drainage and whatever the case may be. So we had the plans put in by a builder, and they built the two-car garage, and it was approved by the planning commission and everything else before he built it. After we got in there with that, I'm sorry, we're not part of the 24-foot with Westwood Pines. This is the Moyock Crossing, and my photograph is in there. But then we had the driveway put in after everything was approved. Well, evidently, the gentleman, company that put the driveway in, went over into the easement. So I'm really actually looking to see if we can get a variation on the easements from 10 foot down to 5 foot, because that's actually 20 feet in between our house for a swale or conveyance that's on a 3-to-1 with a maximum of 12 inches for drainage. And we are in a curb and sewage stormwater system, and it's been accepted and everything else like that. So everything that comes out of between our houses and our development runs into the street, over the to the curb, and then down to this storm drain. We also have in the facility, in the area, 2 drainage ponds that run into Shingle Landing Creek. So everything that goes in there is taken care of by the sewage system, which is county-owned, as well as the storm drains. So we're kind of running into a little problem with this. Can you put that picture back up, please? Not that one. Not that one. That's it, right there. So I also have a letter from my neighbor. She has been there just as long as we have, and she has not seen any flooding, anything like that overly from like the hurricane we had last year, as well as the rains that we get. The water comes down to the street, and you can see there's a drain right there from the driveway and everything else, and it does not impose any flooding that we have seen so far. And we don't think that the water runoff from the driveway is going to be impeding on the amount of water that comes down, because from what we understand is that most of this is clay underneath anyway. If it has topsoil on top, it's going to soak in and then still run off. So really, with the driveway being there, it's just like having a clay top piece to it. The other thing with this is that if they approve the garage and everything and have the driveway, I'll have to cut that driveway out, and that's going to be a big expense to cut that driveway. I won't have a driveway. I'll have just a walkway. If I do that, it won't be big enough to get a car or a truck or anything else back there to that garage. So I'd kind of like to see, back the county and the commissioners to get to the 5-foot easement, which is still 10 feet between the two things, rather than the 20 feet that currently is. And that's 20 feet on one side and 20 feet on the other side. So there's a lot of excess in easements in here, which actually don't provide any advantage for the runoff coming down from any rains and whatever the case may be. The other thing that we noticed on here is that people or the county is allowing fences to be up to the property line, and they are joining other properties. So you're actually getting a constant, fence that is actually blocking the whole easement of 20 feet. So, and that is also something that is going to be stopping water from going down, which more so than what we have with just an open conveyance for the water as well as the driveway. So I don't know really what else I can tell you about this other than the fact that
So, Mr. Blaine, you contracted with the builder to add the additional garage in the rear of your property, and at that same time contracted to have the additional concrete poured, or was it concrete?
no, sir, that was after the building of the.
Okay, so you had another contractor come on your property.
Yes, yes.
And do that.
I'm sorry to say, but we asked the concrete people, the company, what the easement was, and he said it was 5 feet, so we didn't question that. And I'm sorry, after the case. Yeah, I know.
And was this a license? Do you know if I'm assuming you used a licensed North Carolina contractor to?
I don't know, sir. I believe he is. I can't answer that question because we did not go for the contract. He did almost all of the concrete stuff in Moyout Crossing for doing things like the driveways there, as well as the patios and everything else that people are adding on there. So I can't answer that question. I do not know.
Well, who did you contract with to build the garage then? Did they
that was State Line Builders.
Okay, and they provided and then you contracted with someone else to do the concrete work?
That's right. That's correct.
And he told you there was a 5-foot easement.
Yeah, he did. Well, see, I'm from Florida, and I'm sorry to say that I come up here for the summer. But so we kind of like did a lot over the phone to get the guy to do this, and he's done a lot of the stuff in it. And I'm kind of having a hard time with this now because of the fact that this driveway is not suitable to be able to use the garage. Now, the Planning Commission approved the garage, and it was inspected and everything else, by the inspectors after it was built, or before it was built, and approved by the county. So, I have a garage that I can't use if I have to cut the driveway in half.
Well, I mean, they approved the building, is what they approved.
Yeah. So how did you find? How did the concrete guy come into your orbit then? Was the contractor? Did you hire for the State Line? Say, oh, we use this
no,
guy.
sir. He was putting in a lot of the other things in the community for like patios and walkways and things like that in the community. There's a lot of walkways in there that go around the side of the house, and that's how we got that. It's like a community thing. You ask the question, who's been doing what, and what they would recommend as the HOA would say, and that's how we got to this gentleman or this company.
Sounds like he didn't cheat and check before.
Well, I mean, you're probably right, sir, but I don't understand why they are not regulated to do this, and they have to have a permit to do this. That's what was got to me, because the people that put in the garage had to have a permit, and they were, to do that.
Well, you have to have a permit too, right? To have a permit. Aren't you supposed to? Yes.
Yes, he should.
He didn't get a permit.
He didn't get a
so there's
permit.
violation right there.
Yeah, well, yeah, but from what Mr. Ott was saying, you don't need a permit for a single driveway.
To build it,
Building permit.
A building
have
permit.
a building permit, not a DOT permit.
Okay, well, okay.
So the county should have got a permit with the county before he even poured that driveway.
And I
Probably,
don't
sir.
believe on this one that the driveway was shown on the site plan. I think it was just the
add-on.
detached,
Yeah.
the detached garage in the back.
Okay.
For a really big one.
Right.
I can't do that. I can't get anything else back there, though. I mean, no vehicle, no boat, no nothing.
I guess if the state found out that this contractor was doing this without a license, they'd have a big issue with this contractor, I believe.
Well, we
If he's
went.
out of state,
Front page of
if
the
he's out of state, how are you going to do anything?
Well, if he is, yeah.
We talked with Judge Morrison. I don't know whether you know him or not. But Judge Morrison was advising us to what we could do with this because of the contractor part of it. And he said, you're wasting your time because you're trying to get money out of him, and he hasn't got the money to be able to get this approved.
Basically.
So we're kind of like between a rock and a hard place right now. But if I had the 5 foot, okay, or the 10 feet from 5 feet, we would be okay. we would be
Right,
within.
I think we understand that. I'm just trying to get at how you got to this position because,
Yeah.
We're being asked to fix a problem that isn't a problem. It's not our problem. We have certain restrictions on how we do things, and you hired an illicit contractor, for lack of a better description, and he's put you in this position.
Yes, sir.
But you're asking us to fix a problem that's not of our making.
Well,
And
this
that-
is actually for a countywide thing for the 10 foot to the 5 foot.
Right, and it's a bigger issue for us. We have these setbacks for a reason, except in certain conditions where they come before us, and they set that for higher density, commercial,
Yeah.
and things of that nature. So,
And most of them are for like your swales. I mean, the swales, with a swale is only 3 feet wide or 6 feet on either side. 3 feet on either side for 6 feet total.
Mm-hmm.
That's more than enough and less than the 5 feet, which should be on either side. So you're adding an extra 5 feet to that easement.
Setbacks provide a wide variety of reasons, the little purposes. The little swale is one of them, but that's not the only reason we have setbacks.
Well,
And relative to impervious
Yeah.
material, comparing your driveway to turf on top of topsoil on top of clay, you'll still have absorption by the grass and the turf that's there a lot better than that driveway will. So while if we get inundated with a really big storm, you're going to have runoff the driveway and off the turf, but the reality is it isn't impervious. That a concrete driveway is impervious, whereas sod is not.
okay.
We understand your
predicament.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further for us, sir?
I don't have anything else to add. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you for your time this evening, appreciate it. Al Brook. And again, Mr. Brook, if you would please state your name and address for the record.
My
for
name
us.
is Alton Brook. I live at 114 Hidden View Loop in Mooryock Crossings. Okay. The situation that I have here, I didn't see a picture shown of my lot here. I was issued the violation on September the 11th for an encroachment onto the easement. What I had when I had the house built or got with the builder, I noticed they had on the plot the distance between, on the right-hand side where my driveway is, to the house was only 15 feet. So I had them move the house over an additional 5 feet to allow me to put in the driveway that would go back to my two-car garage that I had built. When I got with the builder, before I bought the lot, I stated that that was my intent to have a garage with a driveway going back there. So, and I had the plot, and I was aware of the 10-foot easement. What I have here is some pictures that I have taken. Once I had it put in, even though I had the house moved over, it actually encroaches about 16 inches on a short span into that easement. And I was not aware of it, and when the contractor put the concrete in, we thought we were still being outside that 10-foot easement.
Okay.
So when I heard about the text amendment going to 5 foot, that would well take care of any issues that I had. And I didn't know if it was a possibility to do a case-by-case basis looking at the situation that I have on this.
Again, was that concrete after the fact?
No.
the builder put it in, or
No, that was after the fact, yes. I had the garage built. I'm sorry?
He probably didn't get a permit either on the driveway.
That is true.
Okay.
Now,
Two violations.
this is,
Same guy.
it is not. It is not, no. It is not the same guy.
Good jobs, okay.
But what I ran into, I had to get approvals from the HOA as well as getting a permit for my garage. At the time, I was not aware of a permit for the driveway, and that falls on me. Now, the contractor that I hired to do the work for me, whether he was aware of it or what the setbacks are, I can't answer for him.
He's required, he knows he needs a permit. So I appreciate your willingness to take a bullet for him. The reality is.
He knows better.
He also needs a permit.
Okay, well, but you didn't show any pictures of my house or my lot. Can I give you some pictures to look
Yes,
at?
Ms. Cicero, if you'd like to.
What I have here, looking at the swales, the driveway.
Out of thousands.
It's all in there.
Mr. Stikelether, can you address that question he had about a case-by-case basis?
Yes, ma'am, I can. So there is a process to allow exceptions to a rule on a case-by-case basis in the state of North Carolina. That process is the variance process that we spoke about earlier, where there's a pretty high standard that you have to meet in order to be granted a variance. Very few cases actually meet all of those criteria. So that is the only way to do it on a case-by-case, unless you have something in an ordinance, for instance, the driveway solution that Mr. Otts was talking about, where he can come in as an out, because we wrote that part of the code based on the NCDOT guidelines. So that's why we are comfortable if NCDOT signs off on it, accepting those driveways. With this situation, this part of the code was not written with any necessarily state recommendations as a guideline. It went through probably, I'm assuming, some public input, community input. I'm sure when the UDO was rewritten in 2006, there was a lot of people who came and gave a lot of input on what they wanted the community to look and feel like. And setbacks provide that. They provide drainage. They provide public safety access. So there's a whole lot that goes into that. The only method for a setback violation like this would be to go through a variance process.
Okay.
And as you or Mr. McCree pointed out, a variance, one of the conditions is that no other reasonable use of your property can be done. So that would mean you couldn't put a house unless you could get this driveway in. You couldn't. So the reality is, as Mr. Stikelether alluded to be able to be granted a variance literally means unless you get that, there is nothing you can do with that property. And clearly, your house could be there without the driveway to the side. So a variance is not your solution.
I looked into that, and that's my conclusion as well. Mm-hmm.
Would these people have another recourse if somebody knowingly went and made a lot larger driveway or went over where they shouldn't have? Couldn't I go after the person who did it?
They, of course, would need to consult with their lawyer. I can't give legal advice.
Well,
my take on that, I could go after the contractor. I could lawsuit and all that, try to get it, but I think that's like trying to get blood out of a stone. Mm-hmm. That would be a long, drawn-out process that wouldn't benefit me in the long run. What I'm looking at, I have applied for a permit since then and have been approved for a fix on that. But the being retired, living on a fixed income, the cost that's going to be involved with that is going to be substantial, tearing out part of that driveway and redoing it. So
What is the length of the 16-inch encroachment?
the length is approximately 10 feet.
And looking at the pictures that you sent your neighbor, I mean, there was a pretty, it looks like they have a lot between, if you take the stake out, we didn't know where the survey stake was. I mean, 16 inches. I mean, I leave here tonight and I do 59 on 168. I'll put $1 million that nobody's going to stop my car in a 55 mile per hour zone. I mean, I get it. Rules are rules, but 16 inches.
Yeah, but I think about my neighbor who had to tear his whole front driveway out.
Yeah, I mean,
because he wasn't following the rules and it had to come out. And he couldn't afford it either, I don't think.
How did they catch that one?
I have no earthly idea.
How did somebody catch 16? I mean, who has time to go and measure 16 inches? That's all I'm saying. But
I don't know. All right. Mr. Book, did you have anything further you'd like to add this evening? Just kind of deviated away from you at this point in time. And
No, I do not. No.
Thank you.
right.
Well, that's, I'm just trying to do everything I can to try and
Yeah, we
reduce
understand
my
that.
cost that's going to be involved with it, but meet the county's requirements too.
Right.
So,
Thank you. We appreciate that. We appreciate your candor and honesty this evening. It means a lot. Thank you.
certainly, you're welcome.
I don't have anyone else signed up this evening. Would anyone else like to speak this evening? Come on up, sir. If you would, give me your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Matt Raftery. I live at 126 Parish Point Lane. I'm actually the November house that was brought up earlier. So I was the very first one in the neighborhood to answer some of the questions. I've lived there the longest. We've been through several storms. Water does not run off my driveway, cross the street, and run up the neighbor's driveway. The storm drainage system has been very adequate. There hasn't been even any standing water in the street during any of the storms. It's drained so well. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, that we've seen it. We've had storms come through. The larger width driveway has not been a problem at all. Everything's drained how it's supposed to, and actually I could argue that my yard actually is one of the ones that has the least amount of standing water in it compared to ones that have more grass and less driveway. Mine's yard's probably one of the best ones that drains, and I never have standing water in it. So I just wanted to bring that up, and if there was any other questions that from the homeowner side of this, we all bought brand new houses thinking everything was good, paid for our third car drive, our garage, paid for our extra concrete, got letters of occupancy, got to move in, and like for me, it was 6 months later, I get a letter saying your driveway and you're going to get fined. So it's just kind of a weird process it's been.
Did we learn anything?
Yeah.
Well, and again, I'm a mechanical contractor, do air conditioning. I've got to get permits that are required when I do work. If I get caught not doing it, I'm going to get fined, violation. I got to fix it on my own dime. If a contractor doing work without a permit, required permit, then he's taking a chance, and it being caught not done right, and he's in violation. And we have laws that if he's violated, the contractor's violated it, and there's nothing we can do about a violation like that. I mean, he's working without a proper permit.
And I understand that if I came and added something onto my house. This was a brand new, everything was bought and paid for, signed.
Yeah,
and-
but I mean, we've had some that when they're getting work done, they're getting work without
Right.
the proper permits and licenses and stuff like that.
Nat, is your house somewhere that you had an encroachment driveway as well, or is it just you just had a wider driveway?
And mine, it's just a wider driveway.
Okay, all
How
right.
wide is your driveway? 34?
Pretty much. I was the one that everybody built off of because they saw mine and was like, oh, we want that. Yep.
Now your neighbors hate you.
Chairman, I got
sir.
a question to ask the county attorney or the manager. What recourse does the county have when we find a contractor like this in violation? What can we do?
I don't think at this point the county has any recourse against the contractor. The ordinance calls for enforcement as to someone who owns the property that's in violation. The remedy with the contractor would be to catch it early on if possible, and then to deny certificates of occupancy or revoke permits.
And there would be no, if we change the ordinance itself, we can't add a look back at the contractor, is that correct?
That's
So,
correct.
right.
There'd be no basis upon which the county could take enforcement action for these violations.
No,
So
but
they're free and clear, so to speak.
As far as the county's ability to take any enforcement actions of the contractor, yes.
But the homeowner can go back to the contractor and go back to the state and do reporting and.
There's also
Well, I mean-
not holding the back.
Well, I mean, if you can't go back to the state, because if they say, well.
There's no
I mean, they
license to
said-
go after.
Yeah. I mean, if the state
No, they can
said-
tell, the state can, if the contractor does not have a North Carolina license and they're required, they can go after the contractor legally and stop them, from work,
Maybe
yes.
appear on the front page.
There you go.
Don't use this guy.
North
Okay.
Carolina is the wrong state.
Anything further, sir?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else this evening? Mark, you already, come on up. You're going to public.
Start the timer.
Mr. Mark Bissell.
Mark Bissell, 3512 North Currituck Highway, Kitty Hawk. What I'd just like to throw out that there is another solution rather than getting a variance, which is to amend Section 10 of the UDO to either amend the setback exemptions under paragraph B, or to amend the allowable setback encroachments under paragraph C to add driveways to the allowable encroachments of porches, decks, patios, steps, sidewalks, and similar site features, as long as they do not impede the flow of stormwater. Also, I wanted to point out that there's a kind of a similar situation that may be somewhat precedent-setting, which occurred over at Lakeview, where there was a community sidewalk that was built too close to the property line through a contractor error. And that permit was amended with concurrence from the adjoining property owner, which was the Eagle Creek HOA. So I think as long as you
Remember that, I was here when that happened.
Yep.
Sidewalk kind of went a little like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. At this time, I'll close the public hearing.
Can I ask a question before we close it?
Sure.
Is there any staff concerns about what Mr. Bissell just alluded to?
Allowing driveways to deviate, essentially allowing a deviation for driveways. In that exception, we do allow, and I believe, and I'm going to look to my staff, that we do allow a 3-foot encroachment as it is for the things such as sidewalks, decks, steps, and things like that.
Fences.
But but if I understand correctly, that limitation or that limit of things that are allowed in that easement are, by definition, an easement is a place for accessibility down the side in between houses. And fencing is considered temporary, even if it's in concrete, because if, for whatever reason, you got to trench up in between houses, right, for a utility, et cetera, a driveway that's sitting there is, that's typically why you don't, that hard structures are not allowed within that anything that's in there is supposed to be fairly easy
Benign,
to destroy,
easy to move, and
destroy and replace.
And that's where I would have some concern over that, and it would be one of those things I would like to vet it with my staff and the county engineer. A driveway is a little bit different, in my opinion, than steps or a deck.
Papers, that's concrete.
Well, we would.
Paper walkway.
That's the same.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the key to what Laurie just said is we would probably need a little bit of time to consider that more in depth before we said our comfort level, just because it just came up here. Having said that, I mean, it's ultimately a decision of this board. If that's what you all want to allow, then I mean that's the decision of the 7 Board of Commissioners. So
I think before we, this definitely needs some more consideration before we take any action on that tonight.
Yeah, I'm concerned, like I've said several times, with the existing issues we have with these 8 property owners. How do we protect them? And because we're talking about from here going forward. I don't want to lose sight of these 8 people and the issues that they're facing.
Would it be reasonable to suggest that we have potential solutions, especially with DOT, to alleviate the concerns with the 8, and then look at whatever the change, if change, needs to be made with the setbacks and the driveways going forward? But these folks are losing sleep over it, and in good conscience, I have a hard time making them, even though Kitty's neighbor was, but a lot of this is folks that were new to the area, and to be honest, had folks that did stuff that they never should have been doing.
So I think, and if Laura, you jump in if I'm if I say this incorrectly, I think if DOT sent us an email tomorrow morning saying that they find that it meets that exemption, these 8 driveways are legal.
Well,
And that would lift the violation.
And allow them to pull
On those
permits.
8, yeah, on those 8.
And then we
Yeah.
just
On those
have-
8. Only on those 8, assuming that they don't have side yard setback issues too.
Well, that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
That's a
two
separate issue,
issues
yes,
within
there's a separate
this.
issue.
But as far as the driveway width, if DOT is willing to put, I mean, and that's,
And that's fine, yeah, because they're going to want to be maintaining it. And if they're fine.
and the ordinance already allows that provision. I think that, so yeah, if DOT sent us something tomorrow morning in writing, then that violation is
And
in
we can
compliance.
stay any type of violation enforcement on the setbacks until we actually adopt something one way or the other.
And I believe that the ordinance has a provision that as long as there is a text amendment to remedy a violation, that all enforcement proceedings are stayed. Having said that, we already had stayed enforcement proceedings on this just at a discretionary level because of some of the complications.
Yeah, I just want them to know that we're not dropping the hammer on them tonight.
Okay.
So I guess it sounds like to me we're
Seems-
tabling this.
Yes.
So we can see if we're going to get a letter from DOT on the driveways,
Right, so-
number one, that would resolve those 8. And then we still have some discussions
Procedurally-
regarding setbacks possibly of including that or some.
Procedurally, do I need to leave the hearing open at this point then, rather than closing the public hearing so that we can come back and have more discussion on it?
I mean, you can have your discussion, and if you want to hear from the public going forward, then I would suggest you
Leave public comment
keep
open?
the public hearing open.
Okay.
close it.
I don't think, we've gotten all the feedback.
We got all the public.
Yeah, we
All
just.
right,
No
yeah,
offense.
I'll leave the public.
Wait, we have a hand.
I think we
We
need
got a
to
hand
leave
up.
it open because something might come up between now and then, and we don't want to go back through a re-advertisement to have another public hearing. It's not going to hurt to leave the public hearing open.
Okay.
As
long as Mark doesn't
I think
testify.
she wanted to come up
Oh,
and speak.
do we
if
have
she
someone
could.
else that wanted to speak this evening?
Miss, ma'am? Did-
Okay.
Oh, you didn't want to come up?
All right. Well,
You don't
Okay.
want to be on camera?
Okay, okay.
okay. All right. So,
I don't care either way.
all right. Well, then, following Mr. Owen's suggestion, we'll leave the public comment open at this point in time. And then,
You gonna
Mr.
make a
Esser,
motion?
did you want to make a motion this
I'll
evening?
make a motion that we state that if DOT submits an email that the driveways will be okay, then the violations will be lifted off of the driveway violations. And,
Those 8 Pacific ones, correct?
yeah, and that we have the staff come back with a amended text amendment to address these issues with the setbacks.
Or comments? Would
And
comments
the-
be a more appropriate word?
Right.
Okay,
All
so,
right.
so Ms. LaSister, your staff would come back with give some thought on the pros and cons of adding a driveway to the 5-foot setback as an allowable use.
Okay.
Based on what Mr. Bissell brought up in Section 10. One, the 8 driveways, if we get a memo from DOT that they're okay, and any violations are lifted upon receipt of the email. Yeah, well, not, well, as soon as
When
they
they have
send
time.
it, that the setback issues be continued with the public comment period still open, so staff can bring it back at our next meeting, considering the comments Mr. Bissell made about Section 10, or anything that they can find that might work also, using the deviation process.
And that meeting would be on the
Yeah, correct.
Right.
Well, let me ask a question for our attorney really quick then. So is your motion, for an approval of a solution to the driveways? And if that's the case, do we have to provide findings for that based on this? Or can he just make that?
Well, I'm not hearing that the board is inclined to adopt a text amendment relative to the driveway issue if there is the ability of DOT to issue a statement that meets our ordinance requirements for the deviation. I would think then going forward at a future meeting, you could move to deny the text amendment relative to driveways.
Right. Okay.
Or address it, put additional language in there that it would be brought forward at TRC
Well,
and addressed in
I mean,
any new subdivision.
but you
plat
may be,
going
I
forward.
understand you may be getting to a point if you start adding so many things on that it gets too far removed
Well, right now,
from
we're
the
just- we're
application
just-
before.
We're just tabling it right now. We're kind of getting knee deep, and we haven't made it. So we're tabling. So Owen's is tabling it and directing staff to look into it and come back with some thought on the perils or advantages to allowing driveways as an added use within that setback, much like sidewalks, stairs, and the other things that are currently allowed. Is that adequate?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll second his motion.
Second. Okay. Did you say you wanted to come back on the 17th at our second?
2 weeks from today.
Well, no.
Staff can have comments ready in a couple weeks.
Commissioner Jarvis won't be here for that
Jarvis
one.
won't be here.
If there was a way we could move it to the first
I
week.
think this is
first
important
Monday
for
of.
all the
So
commissioners to be here.
that would be March 2nd. That would be for our March 2nd meeting, then. Okay.
I would appreciate that.
But the people that are in that other category have the peace of mind that we are trying to help them.
All right. Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chairman, can we take 2 minutes?
Take a 5-minute recess, please.
Thank you.
Meeting back into order. Next item under public hearings is PB 19-25, Currituck County, Currituck Station. A request to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 1, General Provisions, Chapter 2, Administration, Chapter 3, Zoning Districts, Chapter 4, Use Standards, Chapter 5, Development Standards, Chapter 6, Subdivision Infrastructure Standards, and Chapter 10, Definitions and Measurements for the purpose of implementing the Moyoc Mega Site Master Plan, otherwise known as Currituck Station, and establishing the Plan Development Currituck Station District and regulations. And Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be a joint effort between myself and the Assistant Planning Director, Donna Volva, who's been involved in this project since essentially its inception. So I'll hand this off to her once at a certain point during our presentation. The Currituck Station, this process, a little background, this process began in 2012 with the Moyoc Small Area Plan. The Board of Commissioners at that time was receiving input from the public. That sitting board responded to the citizens' concerns about growth and development in Moyoc and commissioned the Moyoc Small Area Plan. That went on from 2012 to 2014. This map here is the future land use map from the Moyoc Small Area Plan. One idea that came out of the Moyoc Small Area Plan was that it would recognize the need for an employment center. We were seeing all this residential growth, but we needed something to attract businesses, commercial areas to, in fact, leverage all the residential growth we were seeing to be able to have a commercial area. The employment center was also there for a place for our kids to come back to after they go off to college. Some of the jobs that require a college degree weren't that numerous in Currituck County, but this employment center was to attract those businesses, to give opportunities, job opportunities to our children when they come back from college. So the future land use map of the Moyoc Small Area Plan designated the area here, right here, and it's already so small, but right here, as a full service area where this employment center would happen. One reason that this was designated that area, it's vacant farm. Oh, it's used farming land right now. So we essentially would have a blank slate. It's not popping up in the middle of all these other neighborhoods. We have a blank slate to work with. And the Moyock Small Area Plan also noted the need for a variety of housing, not just the regular single-family home that we're dealing with, that we're used to seeing, but maybe a variety of different types of multifamily, and a commercial area to serve the growing residential neighborhood. So this all came out of the Moyock Small Area Plan and the future land use map. From there, we went to the Moyock site market feasibility study. Just because we would like it to happen in Currituck County, we wanted to make sure that it was feasible, that the market that it would be marketable, and that we're just not dreaming pie in the sky. So we contracted with the consultant, Kimley Horn, to undertake the market feasibility study. The outcome of that market feasibility was that we actually do have a need for this type of development in Currituck County. The outcome of that was 750 acres designated for 1,500 single-family dwellings, 170 acres designated for 1,500 multifamily units. We also saw the need for retail. It came out of that market feasibility study. We have a 250,000 square foot need for retail in this county that could fit here in the Moyock mega site, as it was dubbed then. 300,000 square feet of office and 1 million square feet of industrial space is what kind of came out of that market feasibility study. So from the market feasibility study, we went on and undertook the Moyock mega site master plan. And what that did was, so we had all these great numbers and we had this need for retail and office space and industrial and different types of housing, but it essentially created the bubble map. Where do we want to see these different types of uses in this area that we've designated for the employment center, the Moyock mega site? So this is the bubble map that came out of the master plan, the Moyock master plan. The pink area or the red area is the commercial and the retail space. The purple is office space. The different shades of brown are the different residential areas. The lighter brown, the tan is the single family, and some of the darker brown is the multifamily on this bubble map. It gave us a street layout as well. The Moyock Megasite Master Plan gave us a street layout. The green areas are areas that could potentially be parks and open space, and the gray areas are the industrial areas to fit that need that we had of 1 million square feet of industrial. So we went from small area plan, the feasibility study, the Megasite Master Plan, and now we are creating language, or now we have created language for the UDO for Currituck Station, what has now been dubbed Currituck Station. And that's where we are right now at 2018 to 2020, the master plan. And this is, during this whole process, we've tried to keep the public engaged. We've met with stakeholders on numerous times, and the stakeholders included current property owners, developers, and community leaders. Donna's going to go over some input we've received from some of the stakeholders with the most recent with this language, with the UDO text amendment. She'll go over that. So out of this plan, we have 3,000 residential units that are associated with Currituck Station and the Moyock Megasite. So now Donna, Assistant Planning Director Donna Valva, has pretty much taken the onus of this and has written the text amendment that's going to incorporate the Currituck Station plan development into the UDO. And so we took the master plan here with the bubble map, and we've made different sub-districts within Currituck Station. So at your place, we have some worksheets that have the master plan, the Moyock master plan, the sub-districts, and some of those numbers that I read about what different of these sub-districts are going to do. And Donna will walk through all of this with you. So now we are at the text amendment phase. So, let's see. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Donna Volva to walk you all through this labor of love for us at this point. We've been dealing with this since 2012. So, a nice, long project for local government.
That it has been, a long process. We're about 2 years into the UDO rewrite or the UDO right for this particular text amendment. We've been working with consultants now for about 2 years. And we do have the language that we're presenting to you tonight, along with the pattern book draft. As Laurie mentioned, this proposed text amendment actually implements the Moyock Small Area Plan, the Moyock Megasite Master Plan, the feasibility study, all of those documents that you've been seeing for several years. This text amendment actually puts in place and establishes 2 different zoning designations. The first one is the district that would be Currituck Station, that is the Planned Development District. The second one is the Transportation Corridor Overlay. That district is an overlay district, not a base district, and it is placed over top of certain roads, and those roads would be Currituck Highway and South Mills Road. It's very important to point out that these districts are not districts that will be implemented upon the adoption of a text amendment. These are driven solely by property owners. They would make application along with a potential developer to request these zoning designations. The one thing with the Planned Development District is it actually requires terms and conditions, which you're very familiar with. You've seen that in some of the other developments recently. And it would also include patterns. We'll talk briefly about the suggested pattern book for this as we go on with the presentation. And the Transportation Corridor Overlay is one of those districts that goes over top of the base district. That's action that is required by the board to approve and establish that district. It has prohibited uses listed in there. Should that be part of an application, those prohibited uses would include such things as adult entertainment along the major corridor and South Mills Road. It would also prohibit uses such as outdoor storage, tattoo parlors, and vehicle sales and service. That's actually in the text amendment.
Ms. Donna?
Yes.
I want to hit on something you said. So when we approve, if and when we approve the text amendment, that does not necessarily change the zoning on the land itself, right? So if it's ag now, it will continue to be ag until, if a farmer doesn't want to sell off a portion of their land or any part of their land, they don't have to do so, right? There's no conditions placed on that.
That is correct. What this does is just implements those planning efforts that have been made since 2012 and puts the language in the ordinance in the event that someone would want to make application to establish this district on their property.
Okay.
They would have to come forward with a rezoning application, and our rezoning application requires the property owner's signature, so it would be, the property owner would be involved at this point.
So, okay.
Let me ask a question based on that. If one of the back parcels designated for industrial, a farmer decides he wants to develop as residential, is there any prohibition on him doing that?
So let's say, for instance, he wanted to do an exempt division. Obviously, there'd be no
10 acres.
Be no prohibition in doing that. If he came forward with a request to do a major subdivision that would require the issuance of a use permit, the Board of Commissioners would have to make a finding that it's consistent with the approved plans. Could the approved plans be amended? Absolutely. I mean, as with any long-range plan, they can be amended. There is a process to do that. And should the board wish to approve or entertain those, then that would be handled at that particular time. But the process is in place for that to happen. This is a 30-year plan.
Right.
And getting back to those properties towards the rear will be some time, most likely, because the infrastructure is just not in place in those areas for any type of major subdivision. But to answer your question, plans can be amended if the board saw fit that through change conditions that that particular area would warrant a modification to the master plan.
Thank you.
This proposed text amendment also provides the development and the community forum standards that we'll go over tonight for each one of those sub-districts. It also amends other sections of the ordinance as it relates to non-residential and multifamily development, and that's all non-residential and multifamily development, not just development that would occur in Currituck Station. It's very simple changes, but we will go over those. One thing we need to point out, and I'm sure you've realized that as you've read through it, is this text amendment is well over 100 pages long. And so is the pattern book.
Oh, it's 3 cups of coffee this morning.
It's a lot of information to digest. And I hope I don't bore you tonight with going through each one of these sub-districts and summarizing, but please interrupt me as you have questions, and we can go over those questions you have. Can you go to the next slide, please? I don't see the switch yet. Thank you. So as we're looking at those 2 zoning districts, one is the Planned Development District, and the other is what we're terming the TCOD, or the Transportation Corridor Overlay. With the Planned Development Districts, there are proposed changes as it relates to the PDR, which is the Planned Development Residential District, and the PDM, which is the Mixed Use District. What we're proposing in that particular case is the current language allows for 1.5 dwelling units per acre in the limited service area. And what we're saying is planned developments are required to connect to community water and sewer. And so you should have full services in those areas. And if you are requesting a rezoning to a planned development district, the property should be located in a full service area. If by chance it is not, there's a process in place in which to amend the land use plan to address the current conditions of that property should the water and sewer exist in those areas. So we're asking that the board look at removing the density allocation in the limited service area and maintain the density allocation in the full service area at 3 units per acre. And that's across the board.
Now, is this text amendment, you said something about for something else, is this just for Currituck Station?
There's a little bit of both in there.
Okay.
And as we get into the ones that we're requesting changes for all properties in the county, I'll try to point those out to you.
Okay.
There are several of them, but most of the information before you relates specifically to Currituck Station. We'll talk about the sub-districts for this area. There are 8 sub-districts for Currituck Station, and you have before you in a packet the maps, the master plan map and the sub-district map. There's also a summary sheet for each one of the 8 sub-districts, and I'm just going to briefly go through them. I'll try to make it as brief as possible and cover as much information as we can to identify the developmental standards, the dimensional standards, and summary of the uses that are proposed. Center Station is the core, the center portion of Currituck Station. And that is intended to have a mixture of uses inside that district. It will have a downtown feel to it, or a Main Street feel. There'll be a grid system of streets, and it's intended for all of the development to be close to the streets. There is a minimum maximum setback so that you can achieve that, and a certain percentage of that building facade needs to be within that minimum maximum. The densities are between 5 to 8 units per acre and up to 12 units per acre. And one thing that's been pointed out in this process is how is that applied? Do we look at an individual lot that's coming forward, or do we look at the district? The key to the center station is to maintain a good balance of both residential and commercial uses. And to do that, it's really important that a master developer look at bringing in a large chunk of that 300-acre center station piece. Because if they do that, they gain the ability to pull density off of the commercial. And so you can have concentrations of higher densities inside center station, where you could achieve the medium and higher densities, so potentially even upwards of more than 12 units per acre, as long as your overall density is between that 8 and 5. You get good balance with residential and with commercial by doing that, instead of just having a multifamily developer bring in a project on 2 acres.
Donna, you've talked to developers, I assume, to
We
get their
have.
feel for it, so
Mhm.
they're okay with the densities?
Yeah, the one concern that they had is that if you're trying to achieve a walkable feel or a walkable community in a grid system, is you got to have higher densities, higher than 5 units per acre, and quite frankly, even higher than 8 units per acre. But when you concentrate those in particular areas, you can achieve that. But the key is to bring in a master developer where you're bringing down more than a couple of acres here and there, and you get a good balance of the residential and the commercial. There's no minimum lot size in center station. There's a maximum of 90% lot coverage. There's a 10% open space allocation for Currituck Station. As I mentioned, that front setback, that percentage, is between 0 and 25 feet to the front property line, so it pulls everything towards the road. And you create a clear boulevard where your buildings are close to the road and you're walking down sidewalks. Wider sidewalks in this area is anticipated. Setbacks along the sides and rear all have minimums and maximums. Building height is higher in this area. It's 2 to 4 stories, not a footage, but actual stories. So you have to have a minimum of 2 stories in there and a maximum of 4, but you can go up to 5. Once you hit 3 stories, we're going to be looking for what they call a step back, where you're pulling the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors back away from that front facade and opening it up. Gets into the building massing component. Going down in order in terms of intensity, the charter district is next. And on the back sheet, we have a summary of the allowable uses, which is very important because it's establishing what allowable uses would be permitted in each one of those sub-districts. You know, there was a lot of concern early on about the amount of office space that was proposed for Currituck Station that was found in the feasibility study. And what we looked at is trying to address that in a more comprehensive manner. And in doing so, we're allowing for some other uses to come in Currituck Station so that they have more flexibility. When a project comes in, they have the flexibility of putting the uses where they see fit. And quite frankly, we do envision some modifications to the master plan as projects come forward. When they come forward with a rezoning, most likely it will amend the master plan as well. Going back to the charter sub-district, which is the next one in terms of intensity, this is that flexible area. It is one that would allow for several different types of uses. Residential, it would allow for commercial, it would allow for some light advanced manufacturing uses. It too has a grid type system, but less intense. Setbacks are a little bit further than those that were anticipated in Center Station. Density is much less. It has a maximum of 2 dwelling units per acre, with the ability to go up to 4 if you have a good balance of residential and commercial, and do some type of either vertical or horizontal mixed use, so you can get up to 4 units per acre. if your site is at least 5 acres. Open space is 20%. Residential land area, a maximum of 35%, whereas Center Station does not have that component. There is a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet, a minimum maximum on lot width and depth, and setbacks, as I mentioned, are a little bit greater in this one. Maximum of 35-foot height limitation. This one actually has a greater list of allowable uses because it is that flex area. And when someone were to submit an application for rezoning along with the terms and conditions, this board would evaluate that to make sure it is meeting compatibility between the existing land uses, because there are some existing land uses around the perimeter of this that we need to take special note of and care when someone presents an application in that area to maintain the character. The next one going down the list is the Crossroads. This is the industrial or the advanced manufacturing district, those that would produce jobs. There's no residential allowance in this one. It has a open space requirement of 20%, no minimum lot area, a minimum lot width of 100 feet, maximum lot coverage of 65%, which is consistent with the general business zoning districts and the industrial. Front setbacks are a little bit more because the lot sizes most likely will be a little bit more. Maximum height is 3 stories. And as I mentioned, that they would be careful consideration when they're located near residential uses, you'd be increasing those setbacks. Shorter list of allowable uses, no agricultural, no residential. They do allow for some institutional. The commercial uses would allow, and most likely you'd see these in more of an accessory type setting, eating establishments, offices, artisan food, beverage, breweries, convenience stores, but it's primarily intended for the industrial uses. Cypress is the next one listed. That is more of a residential district and low density in nature for single-family uses. It does allow for some limited commercial at major intersections if they are not exceeding more than 4 acres per intersection. Maximum density is 2 dwelling units per acre, minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet, open space at 35%, minimum maximum lot widths, lot coverage is at 45%. Setbacks range from front would be 20, sides 10, and rear would be 25. That's conventional for what we typically see for residential development, and a maximum height of 35 feet. Very similar in nature to most residential uses. You have the allowable uses listed. It does have duplex and single-family detached. There's no multifamily other than the duplex that's allowed in this category. Junction and Newtown. Junction is the one that we added into the sub-district map. It's a developed area and was not included in the master plan. But because it's such an important part to this project, it's the entryway into Currituck Station. We felt like that if anyone wanted to rezone, that we would put the language in place for them, should they choose to do so. And it'd mainly be redevelopment opportunities. Newtown is the one district that's also redevelopment opportunities. It's at the southern end of this project. We're actually in discussions about possibility of shifting some lines, and we'll talk about that as we move further along in the presentation. Shifting some lines between Newtown and Charter to address some compatibility concerns. And as I mentioned, this is developed area, redevelopment opportunities, maximum of 2 dwelling units per acre. You could go up to 4, very similar to the Charter. If you're doing a mixed-use project, you need 5 acres in which to do that. 35% open space, 10,000 square foot minimum lot size, minimum and maximum lot widths, 35-foot height limitation. Similar setbacks with the exception of the rear. That's shown at 10 feet unless you are adjoining, if it's a non-residential use and you're adjoining a residential use, you'd multiply that times 2 with any of those setbacks. Allowable uses, this has a larger list, but may not include everything that some of the other districts have. And we'll talk about that as we move on. There's been some comments about the Newtown district and including some additional land uses. Moyock Run is the one that is intended for more governmental and civic uses. Schools, parks, utilities, transportation, that includes the property that the county owns, along with another tract of land that's adjacent to the Moyock Run. It does not allow for residential uses. There's a minimum maximum lot width, 65% coverage. It too has a rear setback of 10 feet, maximum height of 3 stories. Allowable land uses are more in the institutional category. No industrial, no residential, no agricultural. The Oak Trail is the last one in the least intense subdistrict. It has very low density and low impact residential uses that are proposed. It is at a density that's higher than what you can achieve in the current agricultural district, but it's only a half a unit per acre and a maximum of up to 1 unit per acre if you are crediting or receiving credit for some of the stormwater infrastructure that may be necessary for this development. Open space is at 50%, and the minimum lot size is at 40,000 square feet. There are also minimum maximum lot widths and 25% lot coverage maximum. The Transportation Corridor Overlay District, as I mentioned, requires the board action. It has a list of prohibited uses. It also has access control along Currituck Highway and South Mills Road. Next slide. So as we talked about earlier and was brought up, there are some changes to the existing ordinance as it relates to non-residential and some multifamily for all projects. That includes parking, landscaping, exterior lighting. It establishes lighting plan standards. It also provides for and simplifies the bicycle parking standards section. Right now, we say you have to have so many bicycle spaces for a certain amount of commercial area. We are eliminating that and just saying, if you need it, you put it in, and when you put it in, this is where it goes. It has to be within so many feet of the entrance. We're not requiring so many spaces per square footage. It's simplifying that requirement. Hopefully we'll be able to see more of it, but putting a number to bicycle spaces we felt was a little excessive. Loading, the loading requirements, we're separating that and including short berth and long berths, and those are the depth of your loading bays. Short would be what we typically see now, up to 35 feet. The long would be up to 50 feet. 50 feet would be required for those types of uses that are exceeding 30,000 square feet. The alternative parking plan is on-street parking for Currituck Station. And it will provide for, if someone wishes to, with their application, to ask for on-street parking, it provides for this allowance for an alternative plan. It limits the amount you can have, it limits where it can be, and it's outside of the travel lanes for the development. Exterior lighting, it establishes a residential lighting height for mainly your street lights, a maximum of 15 feet, which is pretty typical and standard for most residential street lights. It also provides for a standard for the pedestrian lighting, the bollard lights at 4 feet in height.
Well, it looks like you guys have done more downcast lighting as well to stop
Yes.
with some light pollution.
Yeah, it's full cutoff, low light, a cool light, the more LED white lights instead of the orange mercury lights would be anticipated there. We've already talked about the restricted access street for South Mills Road. New language for all development would be crosswalks, language, a width for those, minimum along major arterials and then the secondary streets. Multifamily. There are a lot of changes that are proposed for the multifamily section, and it doesn't really changes the appearance, and it requires that all parking be located to the rear of the building. Most of the illustrations in our ordinance illustrate the buildings pushed close to the road and all the parking behind them. So that's a new requirement would be for all multifamily development. It would allow for alleyways that provides a secondary access for the multifamily units. It requires a porch. That used to be an option for multifamily development. You had a series of elements that you could pick from, and a porch was one of them. This will require a covered entry on multifamily structures. It also requires elevated floors. We've talked a little bit about that in some prior work sessions with the board. And those elevated, it requires that the floor of the multifamily building be located at least 2 feet from finished grade. So it gives a built-up appearance of that unit. Doesn't mean it can't still be on a slab. It would just be an elevated slab. We also looked at changes to the non-residential design standards. Those are modifications primarily to the building facades. Buildings with pitch roofs would have an overhang. It clarifies that buildings that are visible from the highway would have to provide for certain types of building materials, and certain building materials would not be allowed. Not too many changes as it relates to the non-residential design standards. Community form standards, and this is just for Currituck Station. Those are the block standards for the streets. It provides that grid system and requires it for Center Station, Charter, and Cypress. Increase in sidewalk widths for Center Station. Prohibited building materials, such as vinyl will be one of those building materials that will not be a permitted exterior covering in Currituck Station. Building facades and massing, the appearance of what structures look like, the perceived look of a building, breaking it up into sections. So if you had a long building or one that was of greater size, you would break it up into sections so it doesn't appear like one long building. The orientation, the architectural features, and it also establishes the term we've talked about in previous work sessions, the vernacular, the Currituck vernacular. Go to the next slide, please. That brings us to the pattern book, and the pattern book really shows that Currituck vernacular. But the one thing that's important to understand with this pattern book is that it's a guidance document. It's not regulatory in nature. It's intended to provide for a visual of an intended character for this area. And the company that worked with us to develop the building elevations, building materials, they really looked at historical architecture of the county and what elements made these buildings special. And those building patterns were really pitch roofs, deep porches, dormers, sheltered entries, chimneys, and even the elevated foundations. So that's where all of that comes in by looking at those historical building elevations, and we pulled that into the language for the Currituck vernacular. Doesn't mean you can't use the traditional styles. You just pull from 3 of the elements into your building design. You already have to do the elevated foundations for multifamily. You already have to do the sheltered entry for multifamily. So then you pick one more. Public spaces. The pattern book looks at the public spaces. That includes patterns for stormwater, parks, the amenities, the streets, and the pedestrian pathways. Next slide. Building patterns. These are very simple building patterns. It doesn't mean that every building in Currituck Station is intended to look like this. What it does is it pulls each one of those design elements into a building elevation. And they went back and looked at the historical buildings, and you'll see them throughout the document. The Moyock High School, which is now the elementary school, the Whalehead Club, various buildings along right here along this street in front of the courthouse, as well as in the village of Moyock. And they show each one of those elevations and then give you a detail for the components of those building elevations: the overhang, the roof, the porch railings, the type of material that can be used for the siding, the type of material that you should use for the roof. Again, guidance document, not regulatory. The ordinance is the regulatory. The pattern book gives you the feel, the character of what we're looking to achieve there. Next slide. Then it takes you into the street and pedestrian patterns. The ordinance is intended to still give flexibility with the plan development. And we didn't want to regulate road widths, separation, planted medians in certain areas. We wanted to give you an intended character for that. This is what we would be looking for. So when someone came in with an application, their terms and conditions, they would most likely update their pattern book, and we could compare the difference. If the board felt like it was in keeping with the pattern book and the regulations, then you would adopt it accordingly. But this gives you a feel for what would be Center Station, the main road leading in. Open, treed, built, the larger sidewalk, the bicycles, some of the elements overlooking the sidewalk area, the ability to do some on-street parking outside of the travel lanes. Next slide. The public space patterns, the plazas, the squares, the linear lakes that's anticipated for the stormwater management control in these areas. Plazas that would be present in commercial development. Those are all shown in the pattern book. Next slide. So we've worked with the stakeholder, I'm sorry? No, sorry. Oh, we've worked with the stakeholder group for about 2 years now, and we presented this information to them. And some of the concerns that we received from the stakeholders I wanted to share with the board. They were concerned about the vertical mixed use. They said right now that's difficult to sell. People don't like to live above commercial establishments unless you're truly in a city. And that's a concern. Center Station does allow for an increase in density with that vertical mixed use. The other districts, you can do horizontal mixed use where they may not necessarily be attached. So if the board felt like that was something that we needed to discuss more or elaborate on, we could certainly do that. They also felt like that we should require a percentage of the construction be of rot-resistant materials. We felt like that needs to be left up to the individual who's presenting the application. I would think that they would want to use materials that are long-lasting and won't require much maintenance. Single-hung windows, same thing. There is a few pages in the pattern book that speak of double-hung windows. Doesn't mean that they are mandated, but we will clarify that single-hung windows are an acceptable material so that that's not questioned. One of the stakeholders was concerned that elevators should be required in all multifamilies that serve more than 75 units. And when you have more than 75 units, you need another elevator. We feel like that's something that should be handled by the individual who's presenting the application, so we're not proposing to make any change to that. Consider establishing a minimum first floor height of 10 feet and 9 feet for all others. We are allowing that to be flexible with the applicant. The board chooses to direct staff to add that in, we can certainly do so. Consider requiring percentage of fenestration or the glass on all building facades. We require that along the building facades for streets, but not on the ones that are internal to the development or along that access the parking lot.
Don, on the 10-foot minimum first floor height, so if you have a 5-story building and you had a 10-foot first floor, you're probably looking at, what, 65 foot or something like that for the roof line on it?
Mm-hmm. And in Center Station, it's based on number of stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
so you're
you had
adding
you had
height.
a cap of 5 in there,
Yeah.
right? Right. So
Yeah. Review a property line conflict with Newtown and Center Station uses at the intersection. We believe that's something that the board should look at. The area that is south of the Winslow, the existing Winslow Road, the entrance road to the wastewater treatment plant, in between that and Lazy Corner Road is an area that currently has state line builders. There's some commercial uses in there, and there's some vacant property. That right now is shown in Newtown, and Newtown is intended more for a low-density residential with less commercial that immediately adjoins Center Station. We feel like it would probably be better suited to be either in charter, which would wrap around and give for that flexibility to even do some advanced manufacturing uses in there, not intended, but you've already have a use that's in there right now. So we would recommend that the board consider modifying the boundary line or the uses that are allowed in that. Large multifamily buildings appear to be very excessive, and that's in the pattern book, is a reflection of that. There are some buildings in there that are pretty large. That's up to the board whether or not you would want to make a modification of that. Consider the use of stone or stone base for dog parks. It actually says grass in there, artificial turf. There's nothing that would prevent someone from using an alternate material, so we don't feel like that really needs to be addressed.
Donna, can I just back up one? Did you say large multifamily buildings appear to be
Yes.
very expensive or excessive?
Expensive and excessive, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of these larger buildings, they have balconies and they have elements that would be somewhat expensive. And there's a lot of detail that went into them. Again, it is a pattern, it is not, and it is a guide, it is not a requirement. And getting to that point, we're also recommending that there be some allowances for a traditional style of building. And we talked a little bit about this at a work session or two ago, about putting something in there that would resemble typical commercial construction. And consider traditional architecture, and that's the one I was getting at, less of a coastal influence. Next slide. What staff is recommending, or staff comments, would be to provide that transition from Center Station to Newtown on the south side that would not split property lines. There are 3 options in which we could go about doing that. One is to shift the district line, incorporate that into the charter subdistrict. Second one would be to modify the use table, allow for some different uses in the Newtown district than what's currently listed, so it would give a very similar range of uses. Or option 3, make no change at this time, and when someone submits an application for a particular lot, we can amend it at that point. We probably should look at making a modification to the district line or the use table, or maybe a little of both. Pattern book corrections. There are some images that for the sub-districts that need to be replaced. We are still working with the consultant to get those in there. And remove the suggested materials for each one of the sub-districts that they have done. And that's where it actually listed in there for the roof. It needed to be metal or cedar shake, those types of things. They've taken out those references in the actual building elevations. And to provide for some traditional architecture building forms that are typical, that you typically see now in both Center Station and the Charter Subdistrict. Very similar to these types of elevations, which they will add in with board direction. Planning Board made that recommendation. I asked them not to make the change until the board actually made a final decision on what they wanted to do with traditional building forms, not address it, leave it as it is, or add in some of these elements that, so it gives people more of an understanding that yes, you can do other architectural styles. They're not set in the coastal feel. You can do these other styles as well. Next slide. So we've prepared a recommendation for the board. Should you be ready to do that? A lot of information, a lot of pages. I don't know if you are ready for that or if you want to spend a little bit more time evaluating some of these concerns. You may have talked enough about it.
Well, I think we are going to, we're going to consider, we're not going to pass this tonight. We're going to take it under consideration and do a work session. If you're kind of at a stopping point.
I am at a stopping point.
I didn't have anyone signed up tonight.
Can we ask some questions?
Well, of course.
In your experience, based on what you presented tonight, those particular areas that it's just for recommended changes for Currituck Station, does that give a competitive advantage over other areas of the county?
You mean so far as densities and that type of thing? Well, the overall density, if all of those projects, all of those properties were to come in as one, would be a development density of about 1 unit per acre, which would be in keeping with the current requirements. It does allow for concentrations of higher density, as does the planned development districts now. Uses are very similar to those that would be allowed in any other type of planned development. So I think it would be in keeping with other types of planned developments. But what it does do is it allows for the opportunity to bring forth a group of properties in a planned manner, which you could do too, but this already has placed the master plan and all of the market feasibility studies in front of typically what a developer would do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When I asked the question earlier, like you said about the text amendment, this is, oh, sorry. When I asked the question earlier, you said about the text amendment, this is just for Currituck Station. It doesn't affect anything else.
It can affect other properties as it relates to non-residential and multifamily developments that we went over, those design standards. It will not have The actual district only applies to Currituck Station District, not to any properties yet, because that would have to be a rezoning application.
Okay. So if something was on the books, would it affect that?
So if someone had let's say for instance, you had a zoning district that could allow for multifamily development, it would pull that into place. The new design standards would apply. Elevating it, porch.
And we're going to do a work session.
Yes, we are. So, if we don't want to get into it too deep tonight, I think that'd be more appropriate to address it at a work session.
Is there anything that the board wants me to pull together for the work session, or do we want to
150
go?
pages.
I'm sorry?
All 150 pages.
All 200 pages,
All right.
200 plus pages.
No, well, that's why I had 4 cups of coffee. I got to that point.
We'll need a whole pot for
Right,
this.
right. So I think at this time, I'd just like to thank you guys for the amount of hard work and presenting here tonight, and move this to our first meeting in March, which is the 2nd, and have a work session prior to that meeting for discussion with the board. The night before.
On a serious note, what is the board's feeling on what time that work session needs to start? Because it's probably not an hour.
4, at least 2. 2.
2 a.m. the night before.
Kevin says Sunday. Night before.
So do we have I mean, it's 4 o'clock. I mean, is 2 hours or an hour and a half going to be enough?
You're going to have to feed us if we're going to be there that long.
So then do you want to say start it at 3 with dinner to follow, or do you want to eat while we talk about it?
3 with dinner to follow. How's that sound?
Okay.
Kevin, you're going to have to burn an hour vacay.
I'm off that day anyway.
All right. 3 o'clock. And
With dinner to follow.
With dinner to follow, and that will be on March the 2nd.
Fish and bacon.
And maybe the manager will be over his consumption by then.
Yeah. And I've left public comment open, as we haven't heard any from anyone tonight, in case anyone does want to comment this when we bring it back. And I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, it carries. Thank you. Does anybody need a...
That's election eve.
What's that?
That's election eve, just so you know.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
The next day, though.
The next day.
Fires, yeah. Okay. Never asked him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anybody need a respite before we jump into new business?
Well, it depends how long new business will take you, though.
I don't anticipate new business taking a terrible amount of time.
Go for it.
Let's jump.
Okay. All right. Item A, consideration of purchase and sale agreement with Panther Landing LLC for county acquisition of 11.5 acres for use as a convenience center. Mr.
Laurie, can you progress the slide forward one? This is the parcel that's in question. It's at the corner of Panther Landing and Tolls Creek Road. It is part of a current subdivision, and it is part of the open space on that subdivision. On the right-hand side of the picture, you can see where our current convenience site is for Moyoc. The issue, and the reason that we feel like this is a good purchase, that convenience site will be under, the lease for that convenience site will be under the authority of the HOA eventually. And so if they did not want a convenience site to sit there, they could not renew our lease at some future period. And I can tell you it is very difficult to relocate a convenience site, especially once residential development occurs all around.
Well, the growth that we're getting in Moyac, too, we better look for some larger land.
So, and we started the process because we recognized that we needed to expand the convenience site. We put that project on hold once we realized that we probably needed to secure ownership of the site. The green area that you see is roughly 3.5 acres. That is what would be used for the convenience site. We need to purchase 11.5 acres because of stormwater regs. We can only use about 30% of the land that we purchase for impervious area for lot coverage purposes. And so that would allow us to expand the convenience site into the green area. The area in red, this site can be designated as a debris management site if we ever had a bad hurricane, so that you've got a facility up there as well, so that if we ever had really bad debris in the northern end of the county, we can save money by not having to truck it all the way to the airport. So that's essentially the reason for the purchase is to secure the future of this site as the convenience site in the Moyock area. A couple things to note: the final plat, and this will be something that we would include in the deed. The final plat will need to read that this facility can be used for any governmental purpose, so that it's not tied to just a convenience site. If we ever had a need for it for a park or a school site or anything else. And the other thing that we will have to do is request that the developer remove this property from the stormwater permit so that whenever we do decide to expand it, it goes under a stormwater permit that the county holds. And be happy to answer any other questions that you all may have about the site.
The other thing it would do, in just looking at it, is give us one ingress and one outgress.
We've looked at whenever we do redesign a convenience site, we've talked about a couple of things. These are very preliminary, so I'd ask that the public not hold me to what I'm going to say. But we've talked about an in and an out to help with flow, and also doing some kind of raised convenience site so that instead of throwing your waste into a box, you throw it down into a box instead of up into a box. So it's
right now we're just talking about purchasing, and if we do
right now just purchasing the land.
Just
Yeah.
purchasing the land.
You still got to use the one in Grandy, Mike.
What's that?
You still have to use the one in Grandy.
Yeah, I'll ride up north.
All right, anything further from Mr. Steckler?
Mr. Chairman, I will move to approve the request.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next agenda item is board appointments. And first up on that is the Historic Preservation Commission. And on that page. Oh, that's not the way. That's not good.
295.
Thank you.
Virginia Gresky.
Come on.
Yeah, I think Virginia would be an excellent choice.
Missing something here.
Yeah.
Short
Sorry,
preservation.
that
Okay.
one, I looked at the wrong one. It's
Yep.
293.
All right. So you move into.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve Virginia Gresty.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Moyock Stormwater Service District.
So we still have two positions to fill?
Looks like,
Yeah.
well, we would reappoint.
Horace Bell is resigned.
Horst stepping back, and Mary and Barbara are good till 21, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What about
Yes, we do have two more.
Mr. Bass's position?
Oh, he's good. He's good for,
good.
yeah. He got the lucky one. He got the long one. Horace, yeah, he just resigned. He's got family issues. All right, next agenda, Moyock Stormwater Service District. And we have 4 people up, Mr. Charles Ely, Peggy Glusk, Wendy Shannon, and Ryan Hudgens. Or 2 people are up, I guess, right? Charles and Peggy.
They're all good until next.
October. Why are they on here?
Keep going down.
Oh, here we go.
In the red here down there.
Oh, I'm on the wrong page.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you. Well, somebody make a motion.
I'll make the motion that we,
Y'all are ahead of me. Go on.
that we consider Jared Bobzian, Mark Dunn, Kathy Eiler to fill the openings on the board.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, Ocean Sands, Water and Sewer. Next agenda item.
We got one on there.
One on there. Mr. Robert Peters. I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Selena? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda. Ms. Kitty, you said you needed to make an amendment?
I'd like to amend the minutes to provide that I did not vote on PB 1823, the false track, and pursuant to the board's rules of procedure, it was recorded as a voting in the affirmative.
You did not vote for that, is that? That counts as a yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, just went past me there. Don't look at me like that, Paul. Don't judge me. Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I'll recess the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners and open a special meeting of the Tourism Development Authority.
You have a budget amendment before you this evening that is basically to move money out of the repairs and maintenance line and move it into the insurance line item. It's just an increase in insurance premiums for artifacts.
Okay. Thank you. A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And can I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
And I'll reopen the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners and move to go into closed session pursuant to GS 143-318.11A6 to discuss personnel matters and GS 143-318.11A3 in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege in the matter entitled 85 and Sunny LLC v. Currituck County. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.